Hi, John and Linda. Today we're looking at voluntary euthanasia, or self-deliverance as it's called. My guest is Derek Humphrey, who assisted his wife who was terminally ill with cancer, and he gave her an overdose of drugs. Joining us also in this very controversial subject will be a rabbi, a lawyer, an ethics professor, and a doctor. Derek Humphrey's wife, Jean, was terminally ill with cancer. She was suffering excruciating pain, and together they decided to end her life with a fatal dose of drugs. He is now the most well-known advocate of self-deliverance, better known as voluntary euthanasia. But Arthur Dyke, a professor of medical ethics at Harvard University, disagrees with this concept, saying, "It's easy to kill. What's difficult is to live." I'm Nancy Merrill. This is People Are Talking. Again, it was over a year ago that you were here.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. I think before we go any further, you know, Time magazine was writing about you about 3 weeks ago in the wake of the apparent suicide pact of Arthur Kessler and his wife. And we will get into it later on in the show with lawyers and doctors, the various ethical questions. But for the benefit of those who don't know your story in more detail, let's start in on it. The first book you ever wrote was Jean's Way, and this is the controversial true story of your wife. Can you briefly tell us the scenario? What type of cancer she was suffering with, what types of treatments, the prognosis?
Jean was dying of bone cancer, which is incurable. But she had marvelous medical help, and she fought to live. She was not suicidal. She took 3 forms of chemotherapy with great side effects, great punishment, but she took them because she was clutching at life. But they reached a point where she recognized that death was very close, and that she had a good rapport with her doctors, and they said, you know, you are dying, but we'll do all we can to make it peaceful and happy. She had pain, yes, but she had good pain control as well. But the cancer spread to other vital organs, her liver and her lungs. She had thrombosis. She was losing control of her bowels. She was having to take so much drug medication that she was falling asleep in the middle of conversation, and she couldn't move out of bed anymore. And she decided that her life was over. And she decided she didn't want to go back into hospital once again, although she'd been many months in hospitals and not complained. She decided that if death was coming, she would do it in her own way, in her own manner, in her own home. A very individual decision. A lot of people wouldn't agree with it, but it was her decision. And she asked me to help her to die. She said, would I get the poison, and would I talk to her about it?
What was your immediate reaction when your wife asked you to help?
I was surprised, first of all, because it hadn't been something I'd realized or thought anything about. I think I was denying her coming death as much as anybody was, but she was more realistic. She said, well, I am dying, and I want to die this way.
Did you try to argue her out of it? Did you say, no, there may be a cure, we'll increase the drug dosage? You didn't?
No, I thought that she was an intelligent woman with her own feeling of what was right for her, and if this is what she wanted, I didn't disagree. We'd been married for 20 years. We were very much on the same lines and of thought and ethics, so she wouldn't have asked me, I think, if I was...
Could she have done it without your help?
Not easily, no, because I went to get the effective poison. But that's not the point, really. We were very much in love. We had fought this thing together for 2 years. We wanted to be together at the end and stand by one another.
How and what did you determine was the method that you would use to have her die? I mean, what types of drugs?
I went to a London doctor that I knew, not a doctor who'd been treating us, but I knew him as a friend. And I put the position to him, and he handed me a very effective poison. Knowing full well what I was going to do with it, and he told me how to use it.
Now, this all happened in England, and it did come out. It's a well-known fact. Were you ever prosecuted?
No.
Why not?
Well, both in America and in Britain, assisting suicide is a crime, but it's a crime in which the public prosecutor or the district attorney can use his discretion to charge or not to charge you with that crime. There was an inquiry into what I'd done. I pleaded guilty. I told the detectives who came, I'm guilty. I did it. I'm not trying to duck the issue here. But they can use their discretion if they find that this was done for a decent, loving purpose, not an evil, malicious, greedy purpose. If they find that the motive is genuine, there is discretion in the law not to prosecute.
So they did not prosecute?
They did not prosecute.
All right, Arthur, you've heard the story, and if the legal authorities had no problem with what Derek did, do you still have a problem with what he did?
Well, I think what I really want to discuss is the whole idea of pushing this notion as a matter of voluntary euthanasia, asking doctors, asking society to cooperate in these matters. I don't want to sit on personal judgment of Derek. I think there are three sorts of things we have to look at very carefully as to why we wouldn't want to institute voluntary euthanasia. One of them is that not killing is certainly the very basis of our society, in the sense that all cooperative action really depends on a firm inhibition against killing. I mean, if I'm going to go mountain climbing with someone and I find out they're much more concerned with the quality of my life than my life itself, if things get rough for us up there in the mountain, maybe he doesn't want to go through the pain and the suffering of rescue. So we need a very firm commitment against killing in order to be a society. Actually, the alternative to that is war. I mean, the people that we are not sure value our lives become our enemies. So that's one of the foundations of our societies. The second thing is that we do not want to snap hope. Physicians are ministers of hope. It was something that Percival said in the 19th century, the beginning of formal medical ethics in the modern era, wrote that book and said physicians are ministers of hope. And, you know, we can't be sure of cancer. I remember...
But his doctors told his wife, Jean, you are dying.
Yes, well, the doctors said that of my father 30 years ago, and were trying to persuade us that it would be merciful to let him go. And, you know, I was very adamant, and I pleaded with my father, don't give in. He said, I want to die. I said, don't give in. Please, please, you mean something to us. We need a father. And 2 years ago, we celebrated his 80th birthday. And I know of people who, one person in particular was told, you have inoperable cancer. We'd like to operate to ease the pain. He said, no way, I want to go through an operation. He said, I want to write a book. He went home, wrote a book. He was still not terminal as he was supposed to be, so he wrote another book. He kept on writing. 20 years later, he died of a heart attack. Now, you must keep up hope. Now, hope, however, it should not be false, and we know that people can be terminally ill. So we also have to make a distinction between letting die and killing. And I would say that this book, Let Me Die Before I Wake, which Derek has authored, should really read, Make Sure I Die Before I Wake. And that's what I'm objecting to, you see. That it's the making sure. So that, for example...
Let me stop you right here.
Yeah.
What do you mean? We're playing a bit of semantic games here. What do you mean how you would have changed the title to Make Sure We Die Before I Wake?
Well, I hope I'm not playing semantic games, Nancy. That is, there is a difference. I mean, let's imagine a person is on a rock in an inaccessible area, and the floodwaters are rising rapidly. Now, this person has no chance to escape from the floodwaters. The person on the shore can't rescue him. Now, let's say the person on the shore could shoot him because he's in pain. He could also throw out a short rope, and with a short rope, this person could lower himself from jagged rocks to a smooth rock and then be more pain-free, but die sooner. Now, it seems to me that that's what letting die means. That is comforting, giving peace, and sometimes this might be smoothing the pathway to death by not doing certain things that would prolong every moment. Now, when that person, you say, should I throw out that rope? Well, why not? Because we choose risky vacations, for instance. If I went on a skiing vacation, it would be suicide. But some who go on skiing vacations are just taking a risky vacation. He's taking a risky vacation from his dying days. He has the same choices that we have in his dying, not to say I am responsible for prolonging my life every moment of the day. I might be shortening my life by being on this program.
I'm not too... I certainly hope not, Arthur.
Well, it's hard work. It's hard work. And working hard is something we take for granted as long as there's a good purpose in it. Relieving pain is a good purpose. So we give this person that chance even though it might
I
mean
understand.
dying sooner.
Phone question for you. Hello there, you're on People Are Talking.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi there.
Yes, I wanted to ask if the gentleman and his wife had sought the help of a psychiatrist at the time, and is he seeing a psychiatrist now?
Let me, before we ask Derek, why would he seek the aid of a psychiatrist?
Well,
For what purpose?
Well, with the sadness and depression and the aggravation of the fact that this illness was killing her, at that time I would think that a psychiatrist might be able to help.
Okay, sure, stay on the line. Good question.
There are some people with enough courage and balance and philosophy to cope with dying. Had she been depressed, wild, unhappy, yes, we would have sought counseling help. But she was coping, if you read my book or go back and ask her friends, she was coping with dying very well. She didn't need a psychiatrist. Thank you very much.
You seem, I have read the book, and I can attest to the fact that she was an extraordinary woman, as you describe her. Do you understand the reasoning and background of that last question?
Not really.
I'm speaking for him,
he
but
asks if I'm seeing a psychiatrist. Does he think I'm unbalanced?
Are you still on the phone,
deeply
sir?
unhappy or something? I mean,
You don't have to be unstable or unhappy to see a psychiatrist, sir. All I was asking was, since she was depressed and she was going to kill herself and she was thinking about the suicide attempt, if you had ever considered perhaps having her see a psychiatrist.
I see.
No.
You said she wasn't depressed about dying.
No. No.
Nancy, this actually raises an important problem about having laws that would sanction voluntary euthanasia and assisting in a suicide, which is something that Derek is advocating. You really don't know what's going on between two people. I think a lot of murder would actually become, you know, it would all be called assisting in a suicide. That is, you should have seen that guy. You know, it's very difficult. I'm not judging Derek, but I'm saying that a third party, whether it's a psychiatrist or others, might see the situation differently, as I saw the situation differently for my father. Now, what if we all had simply said, oh, this is terrible to see this person suffering, and that would be the end, and we'd have 30 years of very blissful
Arthur, would you accept
life.
hypothetically then, in a situation like this with a terminally ill patient and a relative who wants to be assisted in a death with dignity, and we're trying to get over the legal aspect, who brings in a third party, a psychiatrist, a lawyer, a doctor, or a whole panel sits in on it, and they say yes, would then that be acceptable to you, or would it never be acceptable?
No, because the third party is actually our whole society and our social fabric undergirding that the notion that no innocent person will be killed.
We're taking a break. We're coming right back. Don't go away.
To grow the world's best-tasting potato? Well, first you get yourself a volcano. And after it's through blowing up, you wait, about 65 million years until the soil is just right. Add your perfect climate. Put it all in one place and call it Idaho.
If you want the right potato, you know just where to go. When you find that seed, you know it's real, it's grown in Idaho.
65 million years in the making and worth the wait.
We now take you to the Mattel Hot Wheels Proving Ground, where Hot Wheels are tested for speed, handling, stopping power, and durability. It's this kind of testing that proves Hot Wheels quality. And quality makes Hot Wheels #1 with people who demand the most from their cars. Visit a showroom near you and bring home Hot Wheels cars for your favorite test driver.
Hey, Mom, I'm hungry. How about a granola bar? Not that hungry.
My family wasn't crazy about the taste of many granola bars. Then, I discovered New Trail, the granola bar that tastes great, moist, crunchy, with flavors like peanut butter, cinnamon, or honey graham. New Trail bars taste so good.
I'll help you with the groceries, Mom. Oh, why, thanks. If you tell me which bag has the New Trail bars.
New Trail, good-tasting granola bars.
At the heart of a well-chosen pineapple are a few slices that are the sweetest, tenderest, juiciest, the best. And only the best part is good enough for Dole. packed in its own juice with no sugar added. Because Dole knows what a sparkling texture this brings, what a flavorful touch, what a juicy delight the best part is. So make sure you get only the best part of the pineapple from Dole.
Piscitelli is joining us. He has been on before. He was the attorney for Anne Capute, who you will probably remember about a year ago was in the news. She is the nurse of accused of a so-called mercy killing in Taunton. And Dr. Harvey Finkel is also with us. He's a senior oncologist, hematologist here in University Hospital. He's also an associate professor of medicine at Boston University Medical Center. And sitting next to him is Rabbi Samuel Fox, president of the Massachusetts Council of Rabbis, a professor at Merrimack College, and he teaches a course on death and dying. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Because I introduced you in that order, let me start asking questions in that order. Legally, you heard Derek say he was not prosecuted, that the discretion was up to the district attorney or whatever the comparable person was in England. How do you stand from a lawyer's point of view, viewing the case as you've heard it?
Nancy, I'm amazed that he was not prosecuted. If, in fact, Mr. Humphrey had come to Massachusetts and made that admission, he's admitting to a murder. I mean, as well-intentioned as his motives may have been, as much good faith as he had, and as loving and caring as he was for his wife, who was terminal, like, assuming all those facts, hypothesizing them to be true, nevertheless, he's admitting to what this Commonwealth would determine to be a first-degree murder.
All right, I have several books that he has written. One is called Assisted Suicide, The Compassionate Crime, in which he gives case histories of people who have terminated their own lives. Now, how do you get around the fact, Derek, that it's also, as I understand it, a crime to even give out information on how to kill yourself?
It's not a crime.
It is not a crime.
The First Amendment in America gives you the right to publish anything, and it is not a crime. We have looked into this our book has been out since last year and has been given to the Attorney General of California and any lawyers or prosecutors have asked for it. It is not a crime.
So by writing of the drugs that you believe work successfully on killing people would not be considered legally at all assisting in a suicide?
Not through the written word, no.
How about Massachusetts, Pat?
Well, I think he's right in that respect, Nancy. There is no law to my knowledge dealing with this specifically because it's somewhat new, really, as to what the law would be were to arise.
There's a much more infamous book, if that's right. There's a book out in America called How to Kill, which describes every means which you can kill another human being. And that book is widely sold to people of the soldier of fortune thing. That is not free of prosecution as well. You have that freedom in America to say anything.
You've got the great right that the First Amendment gives you the right of freedom of speech, so that supersedes apparently what
the law of murder or suicide. Yeah.
Yes,
I am concerned, though, and this I'm sure you've heard this argument before, is that depressed people, people with mental illness, for whatever reason, who are thinking about suicide, who are not terminally ill at all, will pick up this book, look at the prescription, and it's quite elaborate what drugs, how they will work, they're guaranteed to work, will go out and get them. Let's assume a case like this happens and he or she leaves a suicide note with a copy of your book next to it. Would you therefore, is there any legal repercussion therefore?
I don't think so. And so far as we know, that hasn't happened. Although, as you say, it could happen. But you've got to remember, I think and be realistic, that the information in my book has been culled from other books which are on sale in American bookshops. This is information in the public domain a long time. Anybody who wants to know about drugs can go into a bookshop, a good bookshop. You can walk to the back, you can look in the medical and reference sections, and you can look up the drugs of your choice and walk out without even buying the book. So the information is already there. We have put it forward in a very responsible and respectable fashion, warning people of the dangers, warning of the legal dangers, insurance problems. We discuss religion and helping other people. We discuss guilt. We think that it's better to put this forward in a book that deals with it in the round of all the pros and cons.
Something we should make very clear, and this is also in your book in all fairness, you say right in the beginning, this book is for those who are terminally ill.
Yes.
This is not for anyone else who is contemplating suicide.
That's
correct?
its meaning, yes. And you have, it takes quite a bit of reading. It's a very
The problem with that,
intense
Nancy,
reading.
is that supposing that you get some young person in his teens who reads the book, who's not terminally ill, but who's
But they can read it in other books.
Well, they may well be. That doesn't mean to say that those who write in those books may not also be subjecting themselves to liability, if not criminal, civil liability. Recall the case down in Florida where that young fellow watched TV, and they said that he killed because of being influenced by TV. Of course, they lost that case. But nevertheless, you see that they're thinking along these lines. It's possible. What if you get someone who's psychotic and reads these things, and ABC follows your procedures? There may be civil liability, if not criminal.
But that would apply to movies. I mean, there are plenty of movies in which it's demonstrated that taking sleeping pills and alcohol is the most effective means of suicide. I mean, it's shown on TV and radio, most of movies, most of the time. Are they prosecuted?
Phone question for you. Hello there, you're on the air.
Yes, I have a comment for your guest who helped his wife die.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't hear you. Could you repeat that?
Yes, I have a comment for your guest who helped his wife die.
Yes.
I do not understand how he could do that. I have been ill for 16 years, and I was given 5 years to live. I wouldn't give up my life for anything. How could he do that with his wife?
Well, it's a matter of individual liberty. I mean, I respect, I'm glad you're alive, madam, and I respect your way you approach your life in your death. But Jean and many others want to approach it differently. She was dying and probably only had 2 or 3 weeks to go of many cancers and thrombosis. It's a matter of individual liberty, death by choice, something that other people in this panel don't seem to respect. You seem to want to institutionalize people's individual attitudes to dying.
Let's talk to Dr. Finkel. You are in one of the most difficult professions, as far as I can see, in medical profession. You're dealing with people who have cancer, and you understand the type of cancer that Derek's wife had. Certainly in your position, the quality of life raises a definite point when you are dealing with people who are dying from cancer. Now, there's 2 points I want to make here. First of all, I believe Professor Dyke said terminal is not an acceptable word. We're all terminal. And he mentions that his father was told, you know, 20 years ago he was going to die. That's the #1 problem. But the #2 problem is, and I think the most difficult one, and perhaps the double-edged sword, is living with dignity, living peacefully and gracefully. And how do you deal with all these issues in your capacity?
Well, I don't think how I deal with it is terribly important. I think the issue is important. I was thinking along the same lines as Professor Dyke early on when I was listening to the first part of the program before I sat down here. There are people who think they're terminally ill. There are people who think their loved one is terminally ill. And they're wrong. And there are times when the doctors, however competent and thorough they may be, are wrong. I would therefore feel very uncomfortable about anyone making a decision like this. We strive so hard to preserve life. I think another point here was also touched on, and in another, obliquely, another way. In our culture, virtually 100% of suicides are manifestations of a psychiatric disease, namely depression. Depression is a treatable psychiatric disease, and in the vast majority of individuals afflicted with it, and this is whether they're depressed and seriously ill with cancer or something else or not, in a vast majority of these people, appropriate therapy and a little luck will get them over it. Now, I'm not speaking specifically of Derek and his wife. I didn't know Derek's wife. I didn't know her medical case, and I really would be presumptuous to talk about that. I have to speak in something of generalities. I think these are two grave objections to this, and I'm not objecting to what he thinks, and I think individuals do have rights. I object to the institutionalization, it's a word I had in my mind as you used it, of this kind of practice. On an individual basis is fine, but to institutionalize this, to me, is dangerous.
We're taking a break. We're coming right back after these messages.
Mayflower Furniture in West Newton is going out of business today, right now. Behind those big front doors lies quality brand name furniture and bedding that must be sold. And now for this week only, you'll save even more. The building is sold. The new owners demand Mayflower's 30,000 square foot third floor showroom immediately. So bring a truck, bring a van, bring a friend. But hurry to Mayflower Furniture just off the Mass Pike in West Newton. Mayflower going out of business today.
You've got the look. Jordache.
Hey, Bob, what,
Hiya, Gil. Hey, what do you think? Let's get it back, Celtics? Pretty neat, huh?
Yeah, what,
New Celtic T-shirts. You can only get them at Stop and Shop. But you gotta remember, a portion of the price goes to TV4's Fund for the Arts. See? You gotta have arts. But you better hurry. Stop and Shop's got a lot of them, but they are going fast.
Okay, you sold me, but I mean, what's all this?
Oh, it's your basic, ordinary hand-picked cheering section.
Let's get it back, Celtics!
Last call, last pot, on stage, please.
Okay.
It's given me a second chance in life.
It saved my life.
And you?
We're a family once again.
Oh? What part are you casting?
The alcoholic.
Anybody can be alcoholic. They don't choose their illness, but they can choose to do something about it. Seminole Point has a proven program to help the alcoholic and their family. Sobriety, the only answer to alcoholism.
Julie DeProfil from Lothian, and you're watching WBZ TV Today's Full.
Dr. Finkel, I'd like to clarify one point for myself just before we went into the break. Did I understand you correctly when you said 100% of suicides have psychological causes?
I don't know what I said, but what I would say is that nearly, in our culture, nearly 100%, I'm sure there's always one exception, of suicides are a result of severe psychiatric illness, and most of those are depression, which is a treatable illness.
All right, in your mind, then, suicide is never a reasonable or normal function of a healthy human being?
Suicide is almost always a symptom, a very dramatic and irrevocable symptom.
All right.
But what about the dying person? I mean, we do die, don't we? We do, and many of us do face up to our death, and we can see it coming this year. Pain and illness, or perhaps we've had a good life and can you honestly say that a person who is dying, who maybe is even aged, Jean wasn't aged, but is both very ill and aged and has had a good life, and they take some drug, make some action, starve themselves, whatever, and precipitate the end of their life, can you call that suicide in the same sense of what you're talking about, depression, psychological, psychiatric reasons? You're getting very muddled here.
No, I'm not getting...
You're mistaking an element of human nature. You're misjudging and underestimating some people's courage and determination and ability to deal with dying.
One has to look at each individual case.
Absolutely.
You're assuming that everyone who's very ill and is depressed or wishes to die does so because of the illness. Many people want to hang on to life even though they cannot get well. And I would maintain that a very large number of these, and one cannot speak in absolutes, are people who are depressed, and that their suicide wish is a manifestation not of their physical illness but of their depression. I'm sure also that you're probably sometimes right. I don't think it's an absolute.
I'm ambivalent about my feelings, Nancy, if I can check. You know, I defended a woman, Anne Capute, who gave a great deal of morphine to a woman who was terminally ill and in terrible pain, excruciating pain, exquisite pain. So my feelings are somewhat allied with yours, Mr. Humphrey, frankly, but legally speaking, what you said you did in Massachusetts and in many other states would be murder. I'm surprised when you say that they have discretion in England not to prosecute. Well, heck, what if you have a change of prosecutors who decides that discretionarily he ought to prosecute for murder?
Yes.
You might go back a year from now or 6 months from now and find yourself prosecuted.
Absolutely. That's the point of the Hemlock Society. We are trying to reform the law so that there isn't this difference between one prosecutor or another. I got away with it, in effect. The next man or woman might not get away with it. That's not good. There should be a new code of conduct in our society and new laws to govern them.
Rabbi Fox, you've heard all the varying arguments. Where do you stand on the position of voluntary euthanasia, mercy killing? There's a whole semantic, you'll excuse me, Professor Dyke, euphemistic terms to describe what Derek did.
Well, there are several things I've been thinking about as I've listened to these well-learned and gentlemen who speak so well. I'm not so sure, number one, that committing suicide is a matter of courage. I don't think we could simply put it down on the platform and say that because X committed suicide, he or she was very courageous. That's number one. Number two, my thoughts go back to a seminar that I participated in not too long ago at the Brigham Women's Hospital, one of Harvard medical teaching hospitals. And I suggested, and that's what they did, they brought cancer victims who, of course, were still alive. They brought a couple, probably the same age as our guest today and his wife. This couple went through excruciating problems. This young woman had taken all these drugs, had gone through radiotherapy, had gone through all the drug therapy, and she did give thoughts to dying. She was on the verge to say, let it go, I want to go. The husband stood by her in that particular case.
But when you say she gave thoughts to dying, what method was she going to use? Was she going to refuse food?
She didn't care what method for a while. Once she said, let's forget all the treatments, just let me die. Another time she said, give me something to help me die. She was going through these same emotions. The husband stood by her. And I don't say that our guest didn't stand by his wife, but somehow, in spite of all these terrible treatments, which are something that do help many people, she came through. She came to be in remission. Here you have a similar case where the other side of the picture was shown.
Do you think it was harder for a husband to stand by the wife as you described and get her over this plateau as you have described, or was it harder for Derek to have to actively participate in his wife's death?
Well, it's easier not to have a guilt conscience later if one did that, if one does have a guilt conscience. But beside all this, I just wanted to show that there were couples that turned the other way. But beside all this, you reach a very basic idea as to the question of authority. In a religious sense, of course, which is my field, the question is, does a human being have authority over everything he wants to do to himself, whether it might affect others or not? This lady's situation and the writing of all those books, as somebody here said very well, could convince others to do that to an extent. And basically on the religious side of the situation, the question is, whose life is it? There was a play that came out, Whose Life Is It Anyway? The question is, whose life is it? Now, what's interesting is the Old Testament, for example, speaks of God blowing life, or the breath of life, into a person, interpreted by many commentaries as blowing a part of himself into that person. The life we have is not exclusively our own to throw around and do whatever we want. That's number one. Number two, several times in the Bible, it's very simply mentioned, you shall do this and this and this, and you shall live with these situations. So that the question rises in a religious sense as to who is the authority of life. And most religions, current religions, Judaism and Christianity, would simply indicate that we are not the exclusive authority of our lives, that that life is partly God's or maybe all God's. For this reason, much resistance is put by our religion, for example, and other religions, some of the other religions as well, on this question that you raised about euthanasia. It's a question of passive, active euthanasia. It's a question of when the euthanasia comes forth, is the patient actually dying? We would generally be against removing the apparatus that has already been connected.
The life support methods, you mean?
But
You'd be against that as well?
Yep.
That's contrary to the laws that's emerging, Rabbi Nancy, because I think the Earl Spring case and other cases like it, if you wish to, any competent adult can withhold life support systems if he is able to vocalize or verbalize that. And that's what the law is saying
That's the new recommendation of this committee this week.
It is.
But that doesn't mean that this law will agree or that the religious sectors will agree with the law.
Oh, if you look at it purely religiously and purely legally as it presently stands, it's, you know...
They never will meet at this point.
The issue there really is that one does not have to accept treatment. And no patient has to accept the treatment as long as he's competent. And if he's not competent, then someone would be acting in his place and may refuse to accept treatment.
But the problem gets much more complicated, doctor, is when the treatment has already been started, as in the case of Karen Ann Quinlan, who could not make that decision.
Well, then someone has to take her place and act for her.
But it's an ongoing treatment, and then the question comes is, do we stop the life support systems because they have been started because the person was not competent at the time to make the decision. They were started by the medical community. But there's a phone question for you. Hello there, you're on the air.
Yes, I couldn't do what Derek did, but I certainly admire him for what he did, because being a professional person, I have taken care of many, many cancer patients, and the trouble is you're making it as a generalized statement, but cancer of the bone, Ewing's disease, is the most formidable, the most horrendous. People have never seen people die from it. I have, and it is the most horrible death. Multiple spontaneous fractures all over your body, bones, all your organs go, and they're living skeletons, only they're just breathing, begging to die, conscious to the very end. I have witnessed it, and my heart went, I could never do anything about it, and the doctors couldn't either, but I can understand why he did it. People shouldn't be so quick to judge him. I wouldn't do it in any other form of cancer. I wouldn't do it even in that. But I can understand why, because that is the worst type of cancer there is. People should be able to see that in order to talk about it, not philosophize so much about it. They have never seen people in their extremity dying of bone cancer.
Can you tell me, you said you're a professional.
Yes.
Are you a doctor?
Nurse.
You're a nurse.
A registered nurse.
All right. Thank you so much for your...
And I want people to realize that, because that is the most horrible. I've seen all types of cancer.
I understand.
But let me tell you, this is the worst.
Dr.
Well,
Finkley.
I would have to question that, because some of us have seen people dying. I'm sure the doctor has. Also, I happen to be a chaplain at the Brigham Women's Hospital, which has a lot of cancer cases. I've seen that. As a child, I saw my uncle die of cancer. And the question is, of course, sometimes the attendant, whatever that attendant is less able to deal with the sickness than the patient. And the point of the matter that I'm trying to bring out is that today in the papers, radio, television, people do see these kind of things. And so that it isn't that people are ignorant or haven't seen it and they make judgments. They have. I see a lot of it. I'm sorry that I have to see it, but I have to learn to deal with it. Also, I want to add one point. The wish to commit suicide is not limited to terminal patients. I'm not talking about patients that are disturbed, although the doctor says most of them would be. The wish to commit suicide enters the mind of many human beings who are perfectly healthy. Sometimes I think about it myself. Not that I'm going to do it, but the point is this is one of the alternatives in life.
But let's not confuse the issue that we are talking about suffering. What you are advocating is those who are terminally ill, and I know we're going to have an argument about the word terminal, as you've all made very good points, that people have been told they were terminal 20 years ago and they're still alive. I think it was your father you were referring to. But let's direct ourselves and point ourselves to the level of suffering and human dignity in relationship to suffering. That woman who called, her feelings were very, very real, and she says, if you haven't seen it, don't judge Derek.
But there was something very surprising about that, and I certainly would welcome the doctor's comments on this as well. What was surprising is we couldn't do anything about it. That is, we have enormous capacity now for pain relief, and we've even learned how to prevent pain in advance. Through the hospice movement, this kind of thing has come about. And when you talk about increasing pain relief, I see this as very different. As long as you are not giving doses that you know are lethal, if you are in effect saying, I'm increasing pain relief here, I'm giving this person some relief, vacation from hard work, as it were, you see, then that vacation may be risky. That is, it may shorten life. But after all, we're talking about a dying person, and we're talking about a choice about how to live while dying when we're giving pain relief. And we can give magnificent pain relief.
I'd like to reinforce that, especially after the comments of the woman who just called, who I'm sure is a very sincere woman and is reporting accurately what she's seen. But most patients with cancer are not in that state. Most patients with cancer are ambulatory and can enjoy a vast majority of the life that they lead.
But let's address those who
those who cannot, there are effective ways of bringing relief to them. I think the rabbi's comment about some of the people who have to watch them, perhaps for frustrating impotence, having more trouble with the disease than the patient is quite true. But patients can be relieved of pain, and the comment that sometimes you may be willing, or I may be willing, and it's true, I am, to risk longevity for comfort in a given situation, that's okay. I think that's fine. I think most of us would agree with that.
But Derek...
Because the point you're missing, yes, there is good pain relief, and I'm glad, and Jean had a great deal of pain relief. In Britain, they're far more advanced in it, especially way back then. But the side effect of effective pain relief is loss of certain faculties. You tend to fall asleep, you're dozy. You administer any drug in heavy dosages, as you are with a severe cancer patient, and there are side effects. And Jean, for instance, and many others, didn't like the side effects. Didn't like the loss of control of her mind, of her conversation, of her ability to communicate. There are, I don't think you can deny this, heavy side effects from heavy doses of painkillers. And some people say, well, enough is enough. If I'm dying, that's there.
We're taking a break. We're coming right back. Don't go away.
We've never really enjoyed bowling that much.
But look what I just discovered. Strike, the newest instant game from the lottery. 3 games to play, 3 chances to win $100,000 instantly.
How much?
$100,000.
That much?
Play Strike. 3 chances to roll a perfect game.
$100,000. Frank, we could move to the other side of the tracks. That fun.
If you like Sports Spotlight, then I know you're going to want to be there for the Genesis Fund's Bob Lobel Sports Spotlight Live Night on Sunday, March 27th. There's going to be a lot of fun and many surprises with people like Elizabeth Walker, Jack Williams, Dick Flavin, among others, and it's for a great cause, too. The Genesis Fund, to help treat birth defects in children. For more information, please write to the Genesis Fund, P.O. Box 1333, Boston 02117, or call 426-6151. See you there.
Met this girl, Brenda, at lunch. She was drinking a Diet 7-Up, and I said, is that the one with no caffeine? And she said, it sure is. She said, all these others have caffeine, every one of them, but not Diet 7-Up. And she said, Diet 7-Up tastes as good as it looks. It does. And look how slender it looks on Brenda.
Oh, yeah.
Caffeine-free Diet 7-Up.
Tastes as good as it looks.
What do you say?
96.
96. That's all you say? 96.
Yeah, what do you see?
Why,
I see peace and tranquility, harmony in a world of discord, an oasis in a desert of daily strife. It's knowledge and beauty.
It's FM 96, WSRS, the art of beautiful music.
And love. It's Simon and Garfunkel. It's Streisand and Sinatra. It is Manolo and Mancini.
Reverend Ed Lane is with us. He's a minister at the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church in Cambridge, sir. And you've been with us before, and as I understand it, your wife also died of cancer.
Yes, 7 years ago.
What are your feelings? You've heard all sorts of arguments from ethics professors, lawyers, from Derek, his personal experiences, from doctors, rabbis.
Well, in my wife's case, we did not come to that point. She had enough pain medication in the drawer beside her bed that she could do this if she chose to, and we had discussed it and had agreed that if she got to the point where she was in this kind of intense pain, and she was clearly terminal, that she would take that action, deliberately avoiding any other involvement of me because of the criminal problem. But my feeling is that the rabbi may have touched on the issue when he raised the question of who is in control of my life. And in the sense that we have, through medical profession, through all sorts of activities, birth control assumed an enormous amount of control over our lives. My own belief is that the individual has the right to make the decision to live or die, and that that is a sacred right of the individual which should not be taken away.
How does your church feel about those views?
I would not presume to speak except to say in general I think the Unitarian Universalist Church has supported the euthanasia question. I do think there is obviously a major legal difference between an active event, that is, of doing something to take a life, and a passive event of withholding artificial support. But in moral terms and in religious terms and ethical terms, that is a far less of an issue than it is legal, because it is, in a personal terminology, ethical terminology, it involves a decision, do I wish to take an act that will end my life? And in that instance, while legally you may have a difference if it's being done by somebody from the outside or passive withholding.
Let me address the woman, the nurse who called, who clearly spoke with great empathy about what she had seen. And Derek's wife had that very cancer she was referring to. It raises the question of guilt, whether or not to help ease these people out of their pain, or guilt if you do ease them out of the pain. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with the person who is still alive, the loved one who is left behind?
Well, I deal with that personally in the sense of my honoring, assuming that the patient is capable of making the decision. Obviously would not apply in a situation such as Karen Ann Quinlan. But the decision is essentially theirs, and I would be aiding them. I would have supported my wife had she reached the point where she wanted to take the medication that would take her life. I would support her if she did not make the decision. And I felt my role was to support her.
I understand. Phone question for you. Hello there, you're on the air.
Hello. My question has to do, and this is addressed to the gentleman from the Hemlock
Mr. Humphrey, sure, go ahead.
My question, and generally to the rest of your guests too, my question has to do with the area of silent responsibility that exists in a domain that's outside of legal interpretation or philosophical or religious interpretation, where no matter what interpretation a person chooses, behind that, I feel there's this area of silent responsibility.
Could you give me an example, sir, of what you mean by silent responsibility? Even a hypothetical example will do.
Yes. Say a person wants to take their life, And in terms of, and I respond from a place of love, say as a loved one. I respond from a place of love, supporting them because of my religious belief or my legal interpretation or whatever. And then feel myself free because I'm acting on some particular interpretation. And the person goes ahead and
I'm not following you, sir. Are you saying, when you say silent responsibility, do you mean they are passive or active in the act?
No, there's a sense in which there's a silent message that you are either encouraging in your silence. You're either.
I see. Now I understand. I think we were talking about this before the show. It was one of your relatives who decided they didn't want to live anymore. I believe it was you, Professor Dyke, was it your grandmother who finally just stopped taking food, just stopped eating, and you interpreted that?
It was my mother that stopped taking food, and I interpreted that as her readiness to go after being very ill for 20 years and being considered as in the last stages of her life, and we honored her wish not to continue to take sustenance. But I think that this question that's just been asked is a very important one, because the whole brunt of what I've been trying to say is that we should cultivate that fragile inhibition not to kill, not to take life. Easing someone's going and honoring their wishes about how to live as they're dying, to me, is not the same as being asked, even silently or whatever, to encourage in any way stepping over the boundary of deliberately killing a human being. That inhibition has to be cultivated.
We're not talking about killing. We're talking about death by request by rational human beings in a justified cause. Did your mother starve herself to death? Now, you started the story. Now finish it. What happened?
Well,
did she starve herself to death, or did something else happen?
No, she probably died of natural causes, and that's the way it would be listed.
By starvation?
Yeah. Nobody knows.
Nobody.
I mean, when
it sounds as though, I mean, well, it's assumed it was starvation, then that was, we'll assume it was for the sake of this argument, then your mother's death, if it was by starvation, was just as much suicide, whatever you want to call it, voluntary euthanasia, as Jean picking up the cup of poison and drinking it. It was a deliberate, conscious act by a human being.
No, I would say not. That is, she's choosing really whether she will be invaded in those last moments, those last days, whatever she had. Yes. She had very little. Whether she'll be invaded by tubes or no, but she's choosing between those tubes and not having those tubes, and that we respected that choice, and legally you should respect such a choice.
How is that different, Professor Dyke, than what Jean chose to do? She didn't want any more of the treatments.
She wanted a specific dosage that would kill her at a particular time. This was a choice against a particular invasion of the body that is painful.
We're taking a break. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
We now take you to the Mattel Hot Wheels Proving Ground, where Hot Wheels are tested for speed, handling, stopping power, and durability. It's this kind of testing that proves Hot Wheels quality. And quality makes Hot Wheels #1 with people who demand the most from their cars. Visit a showroom near you and bring home Hot Wheels cars for your favorite test driver.
Up to now, frozen dinners had a place in every home, but it wasn't the dining room. But now there are new dinner classics from Armour. Complete meals like tender sirloin tips in mushroom sauce, scalloped potatoes, and crisp Italian vegetables.
Harold,
Tonight we're eating in the dining room.
New dinner classics from Armour. Frozen dinners so good they belong in the dining room.
So, this is the dining room.
Hi, Professor Arnold.
Hi. That's my body over there. Always eating things that are good for it. But it never used to consider this hungry soul. Then we discovered light and lively low-fat yogurt. My body likes it because it's good for my body. The body beautiful. I like it because it's rich and creamy and fruity and so satisfying.
Light and lively low-fat yogurt satisfies your body and soul. Now available in convenient 6-pack.
Break free and feel. Feel how splendid you are with the fragrance created by Gloria Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, a rich, expressive fragrance that reveals to the world just how splendid you are. Vanderbilt, let it release the splendor of you. Vanderbilt.
Dr. Joseph Stanton is with us. He's a professor of medicine at Tufts and has been on the show before, very much against the living wills. What are your comments about what Derek Humphrey
did? The
did?
institutions of marriage and medicine both depend upon a very fragile bond of trust. Compassionate caring must never be allowed to become compassionate killing, for there is a world of ethical difference between caring and killing, and assisted suicide must not be recognized by the law.
Well, to assist a loved one to die takes a lot of love and a lot of compassion. I can tell you to be there.
How can you prove that this was Jean's decision, that you may not just
because she told other people before she carried it out.
Did she leave a note?
It was 9 months between the pact and her carrying it out, and she talked about it to her girlfriend.
Let's assume another person does this.
Big one?
Let's assume another instance, a man who is faced with the same circumstance, and he simply becomes tired of his wife's suffering and the dependence and decides to give her the overdose. How prove?
On the facts, on the witnesses, and a charge of murder should follow. As any murder case.
Do you feel
what do? You investigate the circumstances.
I understand what the doctor is trying to point to, both sides, the legal sides and the motives and the reason for doing it. Do you think, we're almost out of time and I am sorry for this, but in your situation, that if ever it did come to trial, the fact that she had written out this pact 9 months before she actually died would have held up in a court?
I think that's what caused that I wasn't charged.
It would have made a difference. It would still be murder either way, although I'm not opposed to your
Gentlemen,
views.
I'm sorry we are out of time. I do appreciate your coming on and being so very, very candid. I hope you'll come on again and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you for joining me today. Have a wonderful weekend and please come back to us on Monday.
Welcome to our humble abode, Sunday open house, as we open the doors wide for all kinds of subjects to share with you this morning. We're glad you could spend part of the long holiday weekend with us. This Memorial Day, we remember those who died in previous wars. Well, what about the estimated 2,500 unaccounted for in Southeast Asia? We'll talk to the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs about that situation. Certainly one of the most popular of all national public radio programs is the program called A Prairie Home Companion. You'll get a chance to meet Garrison Keeler, the man behind this program, as he's profiled by Jan Holmes. The prom season is upon us, and one of the accompanying fears is always that teenagers will drink and drive as part of the celebration. We're going to explore that problem in depth this morning and talk about this which has become the #1 cause of teenagers in our country today, and we'll deal with some of the programs that are trying to combat this problem. You'll also get a chance to meet a lady who spent 4 years in Ireland as the wife of the American ambassador there, and she's going to explode some of the myths and misunderstandings, perhaps, of the Irish. We'll have sports with Bob Ryan, the news and weather, and lots more, so we're glad you can join us this morning. Jan is ready now with our very first guest. Good morning, Jan.
Good morning, Frank, and good morning to all of you. Last week, Mary Ann Chisholm, a prisoner at MCI Framingham, filed suit in the Massachusetts Supreme Court claiming that women are discriminated against in the Commonwealth's correction system. Pat Piscitelli, Mary Ann Chisholm's attorney, has joined us to discuss the issue of the treatment of women prisoners. And unfortunately, due to pending litigation, Commissioner Fair of the correction system was unable to be here this morning. Pat, you're claiming that the correctional system discriminates against women prisoners. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, Jan. What we have said in the suit which we brought is that there's a denial of equal protection of the law as applied to women. And that you don't have the same type of equal facilities, you don't have the same type of work release programs, you don't have the same access to children of women prisoners, because of the fact that you've got one women's institution located in Framingham, and you have many houses of correction throughout the state to which men are sent who have ready access to their children.
As I understand it, the House of Correction in Framingham is a medium security prison, which means that furloughs and work releases aren't allowed?
Well, there are technically no work release programs at Framingham. What they do, they send women who are eligible for parole within 18 months of their parole eligibility date. They send them to a place in Lancaster, which houses a maximum of 25 women. As of last week, I understand there were 35 women there, which is 10 above capacity. And the problem is that that's the only place that you can send these women to.
In the whole state? In the whole
state.
What are you seeking in your suit, then?
Well, we're seeking immediate release of Mary Ann Chisholm because she has 5 children ranging from 7, I think it's 8 now, to 17. And we're seeking that she be allowed more access to her children. We're seeking equal facilities because there are statutes on the books in Massachusetts which indicate that only male prisoners may be sent to certain facilities, such as the psychiatric facility at Bridgewater, the forestry camps. Only males may go. And in view of the fact that we've passed an Equal Rights Amendment here in Massachusetts in 1976, that constitutes a denial of equal treatment.
Let's talk just a minute about Mary Ann. What was she convicted for?
She was convicted of possession of drugs with intent, and she was given a 3 to 5 year sentence to Walpole Prison. But they can't send her there because that's a males-only prison, and they have to send her to the only female institution, which is Framingham.
You mentioned that you're seeking her immediate release if she was found guilty. Why should she be released just because she has 5 children?
No, that's not the reason. That's not the sole reason we're asking her immediate release. We're saying that she has been committed into a facility which is not treating all prisoners alike. Males and females are being discriminated against. Now, until such time as there's an equality of treatment under the law, we feel she should not be committed to any institution.
All right, let me ask another question then. Are men who are at other institutions who've been committed for the same kinds of crime allowed at this point in time to have furloughs or work release or to see their children on a more regular basis?
Oh, they're allowed those things and then some. See, the problem is that for the offense for which Mary Ann Chisholm was committed, her co-defendant, who was a male, was sent to the House of Correction for 18 months. Now, he's closer to where he lives. He has access to his family or whoever may want to see him. But take a woman, if she's committed to prison and she lives in Pittsfield or she lives in Cape Cod, she'd go to Framingham, which is the only place you can send her.
Has she applied for admission to the Lancaster facility?
She can apply this week. After 60 days, I believe, she's eligible to apply. But the problem is she'll be even further away from her children because that's 30 or 40 miles northwest of Framingham.
Sure. Would you seek work release, furlough, or child care release for all women who have children, or for those who have committed less serious crimes? Where would you draw the line?
We have brought a suit which is for all women prisoners, children of women prisoners, as a class suit, as well as for Mary Ann herself, representing those people who are in the same boat as she is.
All right. Is it more than just a question of child care? Are there other inequalities, too, that we should be aware of?
Well, yes, there are, Jan. You see, the problem arises if the work release programs aren't the same, if the furlough programs aren't the same. One person was furloughed from Framingham in the last 14 months, to my knowledge. Then you don't develop a track record. When you go for your parole, you don't go before that parole board and say, well, look, I was furloughed this many times and came back. I was allowed to go to work release, and my employer thinks I'm a great worker. Allow me then to go back into society, reintegrate me more quickly. I've got a track record. In fact, if you go to forestry camp, a male only can go. You get 2.5 days extra time off a month, but females can't go. That's discriminatory. So your parole eligibility is affected by these statutes.
Are you saying then that we need more facilities to take care of women, or are you saying that at Framingham, even though it's a medium security prison, that it should allow some of these other programs?
I'm saying that women can be housed in facilities which house men. If we had someone like a co-ed facility with segregated units for women at each house of correction, you would have more equality. If you had that, why then children of women prisoners could visit them. My clients' children can't afford, they're prohibited financially from traveling to Framingham and seeing their mother as often as they would like, aside from being a traumatic experience. Whereas male prisoners, given the same punishment, can be sentenced to any one of 16 houses of correction, which are minimum security facilities. Now, that's unfair.
Would the changes that you're seeking require legislative action, or can it be done through the courts?
No, it can be done through the courts. It can be judicially enacted, so to speak. The courts have done that in the school cases. I think the federal court, Judge Garrity, did that. And the same thing can be done here through the courts. If they find statutes are blatantly unconstitutional, as they are in this case on their face, they can order that equality be granted to all female prisoners, and perhaps order them to be housed in minimum facilities such as houses of correction, and they can order them to go to forestry camps as well if they choose.
What's the status of the case at this point?
We argued the case before the single justice of the Supreme Judicial Court last week, and it was sent back to Superior Court for a trial. And in the course of it, Justice Wilkins, who heard the case, indicated that it does raise some equal protection issues, and that these issues will not go away. So we're pleased that that was acknowledged as being the case. It will be set for trial at some time in Superior Court in Suffolk County, hopefully within the next 3 or 4 weeks, if we can get that speedy hearing.
And just on a final note, how do we compare in Massachusetts with other states as far as the treatment of women prisoners and having it be such an unequal process between men and women?
We haven't done a thorough investigation yet, Jan, as to how other states treat their prisoners. It would seem to me that if their statutes are similar in wording and kind to those in Massachusetts, given that there's an equal rights amendment in that state, that they would be as horrendous as they are in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your coming to share this information with us this morning.
Thank you, Jan.
Okay. Right now, Bob Bryan is here with some sports talk. Bob?
Marine Corporal Christian Dixon is continuing to describe a January 1980 night when he and the 5 defendants engaged in sexual activities with a 38-year-old Whitman woman. On Friday, Dixon told how the young men took the woman to an isolated Holbrook area. The defendants are accused of raping the woman. In return for his testimony, Dixon has been promised he will not be prosecuted. Today, Dixon, a minister's son, said once the defendants had gone home, he took the woman to the Abington fire station. He testified the woman had asked him to take her to the police, but said Dixon, "I told her I couldn't do that because we'd get in trouble." Defense attorneys claim the woman agreed to have sex with the young men in return for $200. Shelby Scott, TV4, Superior Court in Dedham.
Shelby is following reductions and expenditures that can be made without affecting vital services, then I'm certainly going to support them.
A longer time between major repairs.
Important witness for the defense as well. Today, under cross-examination, the defense made a special effort to discredit Dixon by tripping him up on his own testimony.
But you told us true a little while ago. It wasn't D'Angelo getting first, you getting first. It wasn't Savoy that got it next, it was Dovell, right?
Yes.
2 for 2 wrong, right?
Yes.
Defense attorney P.J. Piscitelli hammered away at Dixon, continuously referring to his previous grand jury testimony. This in an apparent effort to show discrepancies in Dixon's story about the alleged gang rape. Saying that Dixon, quote, struck a deal with the authorities, Piscitelli suggested that Dixon feared he would be imprisoned and kicked out of the Marines if he didn't turn state's evidence. Piscitelli further went on to suggest that the alleged rape victim went willingly with the defendants to the scene of the alleged rape, and that she did not resist when she was involved in various sex acts with them.
The door. She didn't really lock the door, did she?
No.
She didn't turn the key and buzz off, did she?
No.
She wasn't screaming, yelling, was she?
No.
But perhaps Piscitelli's most dramatic presentation came when he showed the jury the alleged victim's bra, which Dixon previously said had been ripped off the woman and damaged during the alleged rape.
The one you say was ripped off?
Yes.
So that it doesn't snap anymore?
I believe so.
You believe it doesn't snap anymore, huh?
Snaps. While the cross-examination was damaging to the prosecution's case, the defense lost an important battle today. After much debate, Judge John Sullivan refused to allow the defense to bring up testimony about the woman's activities before the alleged gang rape. The defense claimed she was acting in a flirtatious way toward other men earlier that evening. Robin?
Carasino. The first strike in the 100...
Now today that witness admitted to lying during earlier testimony. And News 7's Byron Burnett has been in court following this story all along. He's here now with the details. Byron.
Robin, that admission by the prosecution's key witness, Christian Dixon, came after the second day of tough cross-examination by the defense. Dixon said he only lied to the grand jury to protect himself and his friends at the time, the 5 men who are now on trial.
But you forgot about 8 or 9 times what these notes says, that you had to be shown them to refresh yourself after you supposedly exhausted your memory, right? So you read from the script, right? Okay.
Today, all 5 attorneys for the defendants took turns grilling Dixon, trying to pick apart his testimony about the alleged gang rape he says he took part in, but for which he was granted immunity. And in comparing Dixon's statements today to those he made to a grand jury in 1980, the defense managed to reveal some discrepancies. Today, Dixon said the woman involved was not staggering drunk when he and the defendants first met her, but he admitted he told the grand jury she was staggering. And Dixon says he told more lies to the grand jury, lies about the nature and number of the sex acts that occurred, and lies about his knowledge of the woman's injuries.
Is it your position that your memory is like good wine, that it gets better with age?
No, it's not, Your Honor.
But while Dixon acknowledged the discrepancies, he told the court he was scared when he spoke to the grand jury and that he was only trying to protect himself and his former friends, the defendants. However, Dixon still stands by his trial testimony, accusing the defendants of the gang rape.
So you're admitting now you lied to the grand jury when you're under oath?
No, I told the truth as best I remembered.
Didn't you just say some things you told were not the truth? Didn't you just say that in the stand?
Yes.
So you're admitting now you lied to the grand jury?
To protect my friends, yes.
But nevertheless, you're admitting you lied to the grand jury?
Some things, yes.
Now that he has received immunity for testifying, Dixon can only be prosecuted for perjury. But prosecutor Gerald Kirby says he doesn't think Dixon's admission that he lied will hurt his case. And Robin Kirby says he does not intend to prosecute him because he just doesn't think the lies were that serious.
Okay, Byron, we will stick with it, though. Thank you.
Key witness admitting that he lied when he first testified about that 1980 night in Holbrook. The Marine Corporal has now spent a day and a half being cross-examined by the defense attorneys for the 5 men accused of raping a 38-year-old woman that night. Dixon's wife of 10 months has been in the back of the courtroom as Dixon has related how he and the defendants engaged in sexual activities with the woman. Defendant Mark Savoy's attorney, Pat Piscitelli, accused Dixon of testifying from a script.
And have you forgotten to do that? You'd have this paper stuck on your nose so that you just read what supposedly happened there, the order in which it supposedly took place, right?
No.
Defense attorneys also showed the jury the clothes and the underwear the woman was wearing the night of the incident. Prosecutor Gerald Kirby, during redirect, asked Dixon how he felt when investigators first questioned him in 1980.
Felt worried and scared for myself and for my friends.
As Dixon left the stand today, it was unclear if defense attorneys will get another chance at questioning him. One defense attorney told me he will press Judge John Sullivan for recross-examination when court resumes tomorrow morning. Now, if Dixon is not back on the stand, the prosecutor will call one of the Abington firefighters who saw the alleged victim when Dixon left her off at the fire station that night in Holbrook. Liz?
Okay, Shelby, and you'll be there tomorrow.
Right.
Thank you. Cross-examination by defense attorney Stephen Rones. Witness Christian Dixon admitted he lied about what he saw on the night of the alleged gang rape.
Didn't you just say some things you told were not the truth? Didn't you just say that in the stand?
Yes.
So you're admitting now you lied to the grand jury?
To protect my friends, yes.
Dixon admits he took part in the alleged attack 3 years ago, but he's been granted immunity. 5 other young men are charged with raping a 38-year-old woman and abandoning her in a wooded area of Holbrook. Dixon may return to the stand tomorrow. Chris?
Superior Court.
A firefighter and 2 police officers took the stand in the Holbrook 5 trial today. They told a jury of 7 women and 6 men how the alleged victim looked after the 1980 incident in an isolated Holbrook area. An Abington firefighter saw her as she arrived at a fire station early that morning.
Her hair was a mess. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her cheeks were swollen and reddened. Her lips were very swollen. It was severely bruised and abrased. There was a slight amount of bleeding from the area. The woman was extremely scared, agitated, and she was scared. She was very scared. She was terrified.
An Abington police officer took the 38-year-old woman to Brockton Hospital that night.
She was limping on the way into the hospital. Her lip had still been swollen and that she was still crying, still tears coming out of her eyes.
And a Holbrook police officer saw her later that day at her Whitman home.
I observed her walk towards me with a limp. I observed that her face was red and it was swollen on the right side, and that her lips were swollen, and that she was crying.
There was some controversy today over yesterday's testimony by the state's key witness, Christian Dixon. Defense attorneys pressed for a mistrial. They based their motion on Dixon's statement that he lied to the grand jury. Dixon was a participant in the incident and was granted immunity in return for his testimony. Judge John Sullivan denied that mistrial motion. The judge today also denied the defense another turn at cross-examining Dixon. However, the attorneys say they may try to recall Dixon when they present the defense. John?
The victim is under psychiatric care right now.
That's our understanding, and she is not expected to testify.
Under no circumstances?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
That's what I've been told by the prosecutor.
Okay, thank you. Liz and Chris?
Test, semen was found on the woman's body. The prosecution was expected to rest at this point, but now the possibility of the woman herself testifying has surfaced again. The defense has now issued a summons for her to appear in court tomorrow. Defense attorneys say the 5 men on trial for rape have the right to face their accuser. However, their reasons for calling the woman are not the obvious.
Well, naturally, if she doesn't show up, it's our position that the judge would have to enter findings of not guilty. So certainly we would hope that she would not show up if, in fact, that would result in not guilty findings for our clients.
But prosecutor Gerald Kirby says it is not the woman but the Commonwealth who is the accuser. The woman, he says, is the victim who should not be required to testify.
From the professional opinions that I have received from her physicians, it would be detrimental to her health to appear in court.
Whether the woman will show up tomorrow is still unclear, but her psychiatrist is expected to be here to explain to the court why she should not take the stand. From the Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, Byron Barnett, News 7.
Thank you, Byron. Judge Sullivan will be making the ultimate decision on whether or not the woman will testify, and he's expected to make that decision tomorrow. Robert?
Boston. After this break. 5 young defendants begin to tell their side of the story tomorrow. But News Center 5's Pam Cross says the defendants themselves might not take the stand.
Prosecutor Gerald Kirby ended his case with a state chemist who tested clothing and specimens from the rape victim. This morning, a Brockton hospital nurse who saw the victim when she first arrived in the hospital emergency room testified.
Her voice was quivering when she spoke. She had an area on her right side that was like an abrasion.
The 5 defendants are charged with raping the woman, who is now 42, 3 years ago in the woods of Holbrook. Defense attorneys say the woman went willingly. The men received suspended sentences in 1981 after pleading guilty. Following public outcry, they were given the option of resentencing or a trial. Although their attorneys begin presenting a defense tomorrow, it's not likely the defendants will testify on their own behalf. Late this afternoon, Judge Paul Sullivan said he won't make a final decision on whether they can be questioned on their prior guilty pleas until after a defendant is on the witness stand. It's possible the district attorney could get them to tell the jury they admitted guilt 2 years ago. Defense attorneys don't want the jury to know about that guilty plea. They say putting their clients on the stand is just too big a risk to take. Although the victim has been subpoenaed, it's not at all assured she'll testify. It's possible Judge Sullivan could hold a hearing on whether she should be required to appear later this week. At Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, I'm Pam Cross, News Center 5.
Has been the target of hundreds of lawsuits charging the drug causes birth to...
Not the obvious ones.
Well, naturally, if she doesn't show up, it's our position that the judge would have to enter findings of not guilty. So certainly, we would hope that she would not show up if, in fact, that would result in not guilty findings for our clients.
The prosecution is trying to quash that order, saying testifying would do deep psychological harm to that woman. The judge in the case is reviewing psychiatric information about the woman and is expected to make his decision on whether she'd be forced to testify tomorrow. Now, the statutory...
Yes, the Phillies' second baseman ties up the contest, 5-5. It goes on to the 11th. Bob Dernier will end up driving in the winning run. Base hit here. Pete Rose will come around to score. And the Phillies go on with a big comeback win tonight. Celtics today named Chris Ford as their assistant coach. He, of course, was cut at the beginning of the season.
From Neely.
I said I heard the group say something about it.
Oh, you heard the group say something about it? You didn't hear Dixon say anything about it.
I never said I did.
I'm sorry. What you just said to us right 15 minutes ago, it wasn't Dixon that said, the group said it.
Yes.
No further questions.
We asked defense attorney Stephen Rones why none of the defendants took the stand.
Because the judge refused to rule that he would not allow the prosecutor to use the prior guilty pleas of the defendant.
The defense will rest its case Monday morning. Arguments from the prosecution and the defense will be presented to the jury Monday afternoon. The judge will charge the jury Tuesday morning, and the jury should have the case Tuesday afternoon. Roger Goodrich, News Center 5 at Norfolk County Superior Court in Dedham.
In Lawrence tonight, one man is dead.
Say something about it. You didn't hear Dixon say anything about it.
I never said I did.
Dixon, when he testified, said he could not have said such a thing because that sexual act never happened. The defense today also called some men who had been in a Holbrook bar and had seen the alleged victim prior to the incident.
She had her arm around 2 men.
Did you know those 2 men?
No, they had never been in there that I had seen.
Did you make any other observations about her while she had her arms around these 2 men?
Well, she was kissing them each back.
Simpson said the woman appeared to be drunk. Another man testified that he drove to another bar with a woman, but did not go in.
And she said her husband would be looking for us. So I says, I'll see you later. I went up and I dropped her off the library and I went home.
Defense attorneys today decided not to attempt to call the woman to the stand. Stephen Rones told me the decision came after agreement was reached not to let the jury see statements the woman had made to a doctor the night of the incident. He also explained why the defendants did not testify in their own defense.
We would be playing Russian roulette to put our defendants on the stand and then risk his ruling at that point that Mr. Kirby could use the prior convictions to impeach them.
At the end of the day today, Judge John Sullivan told the jury that final arguments in this case will be heard on Monday, that he will instruct them in the law on Tuesday morning, and that the case will be the jury's to decide about midday on Tuesday.
A strange case. The victim doesn't go to the stand. The defendants don't go to the stand. The idea is, does the jury believe that one key witness?
One key witness, Christian Dixon. Both sides agree he is the key to the whole thing.
Might they be out a long time, do you think?
Boy, it's hard to tell with juries. You just don't know.
Okay, Shelby, thank you.
Heard today, News 7's Byron Barnett is here now with the details. Byron?
Robin, as expected, closing arguments by attorneys on both sides focused on the credibility of the prosecution's key witness, Christian Dixon. That's the man who admits he was involved in the alleged gang rape, but was granted immunity for testifying. The prosecution says he is believable. The defense says he is not.
That he admitted lying before the grand jury, and that very admission meant that he was lying to you people, and that's probably the most disturbing thing of all.
Defense attorney Stephen Hrones told the jury he counted 12 lies Dixon told throughout this case. Therefore, Hrones told the jurors they shouldn't believe a word Dixon said. The woman wasn't raped, Hrones argued. She was on a consensual sexual adventure with these men, the defendants, who claimed they thought she was a prostitute. Other defense attorneys continued to attack the woman's credibility by questioning her behavior immediately before and after the time she met the defendants.
What am I going to tell my husband? Tell him the truth. Tell him that Brian went off with some young, immature teenagers. A woman 38 years old, double their age, married, cheating on her husband.
But prosecutor Gerald Kirby told the jurors to put themselves in the woman's position. He suggested her character has nothing to do with the question of whether she was raped. And Kirby argued,
believe the story that he gave in March of 1980. B, don't believe the story he gave in March of 1980, but believe the one he gave in August before the grand jury went under oath, when he was supposed to be telling the truth. C, ignore the first two statements that he made. Believe the one he made in 1983. D, all of the above. E, none of the above. Or F, bull. Bull.
He admitted that he to the grand jury. But more importantly, and much, much more importantly, is that he lied to you.
Dixon cannot be believed. 1 iota, he's 0. And so don't believe any of his testimony. How do you pick and choose with a witness like that?
The alleged victim in this case, who did not testify, came in for some heat too.
A woman that hangs around a place like that all by herself, with no other women except a waitress, at that time of night, in that place, and wants to do a tap dance on the bar, is probably not the president of the garden club in Long Meadow.
You don't have to be president of the East Long Meadow Card Club to be raped. You have a woman who was brutalized. You've got a woman who had 7 men in the wilderness. 7 men that when, at least when one was inside, others are outside that motor vehicle, jumping around and saying, hurry up, it's my turn, I'm next, you've been in there enough.
The judge will instruct the jury in the law, then begin their deliberations probably shortly after noon. And as the attorneys for both sides pointed out, the outcome depends on the credibility of Christian Dixon.
Pointed to that testimony, calling it incredible.
You, as far as the fact and finding truth, can disregard everything that man said. And if you do, there is no case here. The case revolves around Christian Dixon.
We're not the...
Debated that point, it became clear that other considerations, those that made this case a concern of women's groups across the country, would still dominate the proceedings. The judge, John Sullivan, had a probation officer show the defense attorneys a petition signed by 500 women asking him to give the Holbrook 5 the maximum sentence.
Trying to make sentencing the result of some sort of a popularity poll, in effect, is introducing the rule of the mob into the courtroom, and that is the whole point that the courtrooms are set up to prevent. Thank you.
They have been adjudicated not guilty of the serious crimes of rape. It would be a violation of fundamental decency and law for me to try to come in the back door. And there is some suggestion that I should do that in imposing this sentence. Well, clearly, the court could never do that.
No matter what you do, he has been branded as one of the Holbrook 5. That's not question enough. Given the finding of that jury, I don't know what is.
The defendants showed no emotion as they were sentenced to 2 years probation.
You want to get out of my way with that damn thing? Yeah, just relax.
Outside the courtroom, there was anger, frustration, and for the most part, silence. Only one defendant was willing to talk, and briefly.
The women's groups?
Yeah.
They really don't know what the case is about. They're just going off that we pleaded guilty at one time. They don't know why we did, and they're not listening to why we did.
Everyone associated with the Holbrook 5 trial now feels like a victim. The 5 defendants say they have been stigmatized for life. And the woman, the one we've never seen, still contends that she was raped. And she says her life will also never be the same. At Suffolk Superior Court, Kirby Perkins, News Center 5.
Now for a little more pleasant news. 2 young
accused and acquitted of rape received suspended 2-year sentences for malicious destruction of property. Eyewitness News reporter Catherine Kiefer was in Suffolk Superior Court today. Kate?
Well, Liz, of course, the big news, the sentence is suspended. The question today was not whether the 5 gang raped a 38-year-old woman. They were found not guilty of those charges earlier. The question today was whether they had damaged the woman's car and whether that damage exceeded $100. In the courtroom, emotions were restrained. They could have been sentenced up to 10 years in state prison, but their faces showed no fear. The Assistant Norfolk District Attorney, Gerald Kirby, said it would be vindictive to request such a stiff sentence. The judge agreed.
They have been adjudicated not guilty of the serious crimes of rape. It would be a violation of fundamental decency and law for me to try to come in the back door.
The defense attorneys argued that any sentence was too much, that there was no evidence that the 5 had caused more than $100 damage to the car. The decision?
The court orders you be confined at hard labor for the term of 2 years at the House of Correction at Dedham, County of Norfolk. The court orders that execution of this sentence upon you be suspended and be placed on probation for a period of 2 years.
When the 5 were found not guilty of rape or assault earlier this year, their relief was clear.
Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Today, the response was terse.
I really have no feelings about it. You know, so, you know, to me, that's minor. That charge, that's really never fazed me.
I was expecting it. That's about it.
No surprise?
No surprise.
Do you have any reaction to today's decision?
No, I've asked to make no comment.
Why?
Because it may be an appeal. We may appeal. I think that there should have been an entry of not guilty.
Several of the defense attorneys indicated that they are thinking about an appeal to the sentence, but for the defendants, it may be a question of money. This has been a long and expensive proceeding. Liz?
Okay, and very complicated, too. Thank you very much, Catherine. Jack?
Meanwhile, a big today. Last month, these young men were found not guilty of raping a woman, but guilty of damaging a car. As Byron Barnett reports, the Holbrook 5 are on probation, and they'll have to pay for that damaged car.
The court orders you be confined at hard labor for the term of 2 years at the House of Correction at Dedham, County of Norfolk. The court orders that execution of this sentence upon you be suspended and be placed on probation for a period of 2 years.
The 5 young men cleared of rape charges a month ago stood calmly today, showing no signs of emotion as they were sentenced for the lesser crime of malicious destruction of property. They were found guilty of damaging the car of the woman who accused them of raping her. In addition to their sentence of 2 years probation, the defendants were ordered to make a restitution payment for the car damage. That's expected to total about $1,200.
I think it would be a show of vindictiveness on my part to recommend anything more harsher than what I have recommended.
Outside the courtroom, one of the defendants, Robert Tarr, had nothing to say to reporters except that he wasn't surprised.
I was expecting it. That's about it.
Another defendant, Alexander Aldopoulos, expressed his anger with various protest groups who said they all should be in jail.
They don't know what the case is about. They're just going off that we pleaded guilty at one time. They don't know why we did, and they're not listening to why we did. I'm sure that if they understood the workings of the law and why we did that, then they wouldn't have anything to protest about.
There is one other defendant who was to be tried separately for the alleged gang rape, Randy D'Angelo of Holbrook. But because the others were found not guilty of rape, the DA's office says it is likely that the charges against D'Angelo will be dropped. At the Suffolk Superior Courthouse in Boston, I'm Byron Barnett, News 7.
Thank you, Byron. Now, attorneys for at least 2 of the defendants say they will appeal this sentence requiring restitution of the car because they say only one of the young men actually damaged the car.
Rape is a violent crime. To be accused of rape, well, rather horrific thought, isn't it? To go day after day, month after month, year after year, after having some woman call you a rapist. Tough to think about? Of course it is. But vindication has come for one, Kevin Pinto. And we're going to talk about his story this evening. With him, if we can go over and start with Attorney Pat Piscitelli. Kevin Pinto. And Attorney Don Harwood. Now, to give you a better idea of just what took place for Mr. Pinto, we'll use a story put together by Betsy Zulis of Continental Cable. Please watch this, and then we'll talk, and of course the phones will be open. You're welcome to call in.
One by one, the two 18-year-old girls passed in front of a baffled jury. The first to take the stand was Cheryl Moss, who reportedly only recanted her testimony at the urging of Kelly Frederick, the other alleged victim.
The facts that she related to the jurors regarding the instances of April 15th of 1983 were not true. It's my understanding that the defendants were not involved with you in any manner or form in causing any attack upon you, sexual or otherwise. Is that correct? Yes. And that's now your testimony that that story that you related is not true?
Yes.
Are you now telling us the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Has anyone made any promises to you, reward or threats or otherwise, to induce you to now testify in the form that you are?
No.
Are you now telling the truth?
Yes.
Stand up.
After Kelly Frederick asserted she had lied in her previous testimony, the defendants were set free on mandatory findings of not guilty. They were elated, but the implications of the case were troubling for the system.
It's a very difficult set of circumstances for you as jurors, I suppose, to observe, participated in, myself on behalf of the Superior Court, and certainly for counsel, for the defendants, and for the defendants. Joe, well aware these are very serious charges that were brought against these two gentlemen.
Can you tell me what made you decide to recant your testimony?
Just didn't want to lie. It was a lie and any right to do it to anybody. The motive in doing it.
Do you know the two guys?
No, I don't know. What made you do it? Stupid reason. No, real dumb.
You think you're grown up a lot in the last couple of years?
Last 48 hours, yes.
You feel a lot better now that you have recanted your testimony. A lot of people, of course, are going to have different feelings about it, but how do you feel about it?
I feel good. Better. I feel a hell of a lot better. Better. Much. Glad I did it. Very.
Do you worry about the consequences now that you might be...
Well, we did it, and whatever happens.
No. No.
Deserve whatever we get.
Did you know that he was innocent all along?
You better believe it. You better believe it.
And it was just a matter of sticking by him throughout the...
Stuck by him 100%. His family, friends, everyone was very supportive.
And you're satisfied now with the explanation that the women gave for recanting their testimony?
Satisfied. The truth came out.
It's just unfortunate that in so many hearings they did fabricate their testimony. But obviously Mr. Pinto's happy that at least when it really counted, one of them came forward, Kelly Frederick, and admitted to the police that it was a lie.
I do have to give her credit for that, for coming forward and telling the truth over the other girl. Miss Frederick did come forward and finally come forth with the truth. That I have to give her credit for.
A question that remains right now, not so much germane to this discussion, is what the district attorney is going to do. What you saw was perjury. What these two people did, these two girls did, was lie. Twice. Once by accusing Mr. Pinto and a co-defendant of raping them, a vicious, violent crime. And again lying in court by saying it never really happened. Well, we'll wait to see what Mr. O'Malley does on that. That's for him to decide. I spoke with him just a few days ago, and he says he has to read over the transcripts of the trial in order to make an informed decision on it. He was not there during the trial. He said he had to look it over, and he would make his decision from that. Welcome, gentlemen. And What's your gut reaction, Kevin, to watching that happen?
I'm just glad it's over, you know. I'm really glad that it's over, you know, as far as 2.5 years of torment, you know.
Jump in any time, gentlemen. Don't wait for me to ask you a question. If you have some information you think is important, please put it out right away. And your phone calls are welcome. This is two-way talk. The number's coming up on your screen. Your calls are welcome. How were you contacted on a case like this?
Well, Mr. Pinto came in the summer of 1983. I had represented him and Mr. Rogers initially through the probable cause hearing in Hingham District Court. Interestingly, there were actually several times that the girls would have committed the crime of perjury. Once would have been in Hingham District Court in November of 1983. We had a fairly lengthy hearing at that time. In the January grand jury proceeding in 1984, they again committed perjury by falsely accusing Mr. Pinto. And then a third time in the course of trial, one of the victims, Cheryl Moss, testified falsely, and then it wasn't until Kelly Frederick finally came forward after already testifying to a certain extent on direct examination that she finally admitted to the Hanover police that everything she had said was a fabrication. And the next morning after she had admitted that to the Hanover police, they then asked Cheryl Moss whether in fact what she had testified to was untrue, and then Cheryl also indicated that everything she had indicated was a lie. It took both Kevin and I by surprise, I guess, simply because we had been through so many hearings in court. I think I tallied up about 20 or 30 court appearances, just so many times when they wouldn't bend. And then at last, I think what happened was Kelly Frederick, in the course of her testimony, realized that she now has the two men she's accusing in front of her. She has 12 people, the jurors, to her left. And I think it took that for her to appreciate the gravity of the situation and understand that whatever she testifies to now is going to have a serious impact upon these men's lives. And I think it took that jury proceeding to bring out the truth and to get her to come clean, so to speak.
How was it you couldn't make people believe you?
That I couldn't make?
You couldn't make people believe you right from the beginning?
All my friends believed me. You know, everybody who knew me believed me because they know I'm a gentleman in that respect. You know, I'm not no rapist. I mean, why would I be a rapist after 26 years? I've never been arrested before.
That was my next question. You didn't have a long, involved record?
No, I'd never been arrested before. And
so you've never seen a courtroom before, other
No.
than on television?
Yes.
That was the first time?
We believed in Pat very strongly because we knew that he had already passed 3 lie detector tests, including one which was court-appointed. And Don and I had talked about getting him a court-appointed lie detector test to be administered, and when he passed that with flying colors as he had, you know, the other ones, why, there's no question in our minds even prior to that. But when the lie detector test came, I think the girls probably knew what was coming. They knew that Don had gotten a lie detector man who had given the court-appointed test ready to testify, and they knew what other evidence was coming, which was going to kind of blow them out of the water. So I think that that was a sufficient inducement for them to, aside from the fact the moment of truth came when they had that jury sitting to their left.
Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Pat. The thing that really bothers me is, say, in any instance that if someone could say that I raped them, and the next thing you know, they arrest you, they lock you up, and the newspapers pick it up right away, even if you're not guilty or, you know, innocent. Right away, you read it in the newspaper, and you know, every day you see more and more of it. I think, you know, I think they believe the woman more than the men.
Well, good point.
I don't think that's quite the case today. You knew that Gary Dodson case that happened recently where a young woman recanted her testimony, and you get a case like this where 2 women recant their testimony under oath. I think that's going to be more difficult for stories which are fabricated to have the impact that young man thinks so.
Yeah, what I mean is that right away the papers pick it up and they got you, you know, they got you down as a rapist, your neighbors and everybody wonder. And a lot of times you find out that it was, you know, prefabricated or something.
That's the drawback of our system. In fact, there was a meeting one time we had with some newspapers as to what should be done in cases where accusations are made, as to whether or not papers have an obligation not to print those accusations until such time as there's been a full airing of the charges, because you're stigmatized by the accusation alone. And no matter what may happen, there'll be those kooks who will still believe that someone is guilty, even though he's been totally exonerated. There'll be those people who think that Kevin Pinto is guilty of something, although he had two girls flip-flop totally and admit to perjury, and he's as clean as can be, no record, nothing. He's stigmatized. I think it's one of the drawbacks of our system that is allowed.
Doesn't this place the onus on the district attorney now, if he does not punish these girls, and that's the word I'm using, punish. They've got to be punished, and that should be put public as possible.
I agree, Pat. Don and I were tossing this about, and...
Well, I think so, and I think, as Judge Wagner so aptly put, one situation like this where two women fabricate a story, not only is there great damage to Mr. Pinto for what he's gone through for the past 2 years, but I think it casts a bad shadow on all future cases, and I think that there has to be a deterrent, that you just can't lie under oath, put somebody through all that anguish, and in the process do damage to what might be legitimate rape cases. That's what Judge Wagner said, and I think he's right on the mark.
Caller?
Good, very good. I like that answer. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you for your call. The number's coming up on your screen. If you would like to join the conversation, you're more than welcome to. My guests are Pat Piscitelli, attorney Dan Harwood, and Kevin Pinto. You're welcome to join us. What happens with these girls that are brought in? You know, I hear advertised the greater public education so that women will not be afraid to come forward when they have been violated by that violent crime, rape. Where was the special, in Mr. O'Malley's unit, where were these special counselors, these women who do nothing but work with women who have been raped? How convincing were these two young women with these counselors?
Well, I think that's the question that I had and Mr. Piscitelli and Mr. Pinto had the whole way through, because I think the role of a crisis counselor can be a very critical one. I think at the same time there should be some obligation upon the part of both the prosecutor and on the counselor to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. If there are things about what the girls are saying which don't make any sense at all, then they should question the girls about that. For example, in this case, the girls alleged that they were raped and that right after the rape, they hitchhiked home, which didn't make any sense at all. They said they were picked up, raped, and then they hitchhiked home. They didn't make any calls for help or anything. Other things were an ambulance driver indicated that he talked to the two girls a month after the rape, and that the girls said a month after the rape they'd never met Mr. Pinto until that day, this being a month after the rape. And when you couple those two factors with the fact that there were polygraph tests, which he'd passed, one of which the prosecution knew about, it seems to me that a more serious examination of their story should have been undertaken.
Had the district attorney gone to the point of no return on this? Did he have to continue trial?
There is no point of no return for DA. He can certainly now drop the charge anytime he wants. In this case, I think that there was a great deal of question after Don finished cross-examination of the first witness, in this case, Cheryl Nass. There was a great deal of question as to whether or not she came across credibly, and I think that was not in fact the case. The DA could have at that point, and could have even after Kelly testified, could have decided to drop the case, because they've got there are representatives, and if they see a case is really not what it appears to be, or what they thought it was, they certainly have an obligation to see that the innocent are acquitted, as well as it is to see that the guilty are punished. In that case, they could have dropped it at any time had they wanted to. In fact, I would suggest that, I would think that a suggestion was there through conversations which were had in open court, that they should have considered doing that sometime.
Welcome. You're on the air.
How you doing, Pat?
Well, thank you.
I'd like to talk to Mr. Pinto. What kind of remorse do you have for these ladies? And if you had the chance to sentence them yourself, what kind of sentence would you give them for what they did to you?
Tough question.
I feel these ladies are definitely sick. I think they have a problem psychiatric-wise. I think more than jail sentence they need. I think they need more psychiatric type of help. But the problems they put me and my family through for this 2.5 years, I feel they deserve some punishment, but I'm not a judge to give that type of punishment.
Why do you think they did it?
I don't know what their reasons were. They're definitely sick girls. Definitely sick girls.
Well, I wish you could have a hand in their punishment because I surely think you deserve it. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Bye.
The number's coming up on your screen. If you'd like to join our program, you're more than welcome to. That was a tough question for you to take.
Good answer.
I would say one of the indications was that 10 days after the alleged rape, one of the victims was afraid she was pregnant, she indicated to police.
How many days?
This was 10 days after the alleged rape. She never told her mother about anything until 10 days after, when she was afraid she was pregnant because she'd missed her period. So the motive to fabricate, our opinion was that she was afraid she was pregnant. She was only 15.
Promiscuity.
And she had a difficult time telling her mother.
Wasn't that the motivation in the Dotson
That's right.
case?
That's right. Same thing. Yeah. And I'm sure that motivation is as strong in a girl 15 years of age. You know, that she's pregnant, and unless she fabricates a rape, why it's going to appear to her mother as if she's promiscuous.
Okay. Are we waiting on the phones? I just was going to check. Are we? All right. The number's coming up on your screen. If you'd like to join our conversation, you're more than welcome to. This is two-way talk. Please join us. Where does your client go from here?
Well, we're in the process of drafting a letter to see whether, in fact, the district attorney's office is going to seek indictments for perjury against the two girls. And until we find out about that, we're really not sure. We think that in the process of seeking those indictments, more answers will come out in terms of what actually happened between the girls and the prosecutor's office, what conversations they had about proceeding with the case. And I think until we know exactly what the intention of Mr. O'Malley is, which my understanding is will be forthcoming in several weeks, we're just going to wait and see what they do.
What is the punishment? What is the most exacting punishment for perjury?
It's at least a 20-year felony. It ordinarily carries the same punishment that the crime the person is on trial for.
It's kind of an awkward case, an awkward situation for the DA in this case, Pat, because our indications are that the girls insisted that they were pressured by the DA's office to proceed with the case, even though they had indicated they did not want to proceed with it. And if, in fact, there's any truth to that...
that's a big O.
Oh, that is a big O, because if, in fact, there's any truth to that, then it's going to place the DA in a position where someone's asking him to secure indictments for perjury against people whom they supposedly are accused of having pressured into testifying. So there may be a case where he should conduct an investigation as to whether or not there's truth to what I understand the girls are saying. And secondly, if that doesn't wash properly, I suppose the Attorney General's office could look into it to be sure that we'd have an impartial investigator inquiring into what happened, what actually happened. I received a call from one of the girls sometime prior to, about a year prior to the time the case was actually...
November of 1983.
Yeah, November 83. And suggesting that they want to drop the case. And I suggested they talk to the DA's office and tell them that. That's the last I heard of it. I think I've forgotten which one of the two called me right now, but we have it in our notes. But it wasn't pursued, nor was it dropped.
That must have slapped your hopes. Did you inform Mr. Pinto of that?
I was informed that through friends of theirs that they want to drop the case. I think it came through either Mr. Pinto or others close to them that they want to drop it, and that's how we were in touch with these people.
Contacted me constantly on it, and they said they wanted to drop it, and they'd like build up my hopes, you know, I'm finally over with it, you know, and I'd tell my mother and father that they're going to drop it and everything, you know, they're coming to their senses, and then they'd just break my hopes and slap me in the face by, you know, going on with it, keep going on, and just the harassment part of it was unbelievable.
You had them contact our office, and they indicated they wanted to drop it, And we in turn suggested to them that they tell the DA they want to drop it, and that's fully a year before the case was tried, and it never was dropped.
So who dashed your hopes? The DA's office, or that's the question, is it not?
Important question.
Who did what? Was it the DA's office, or was it the girls? Scary. Very scary. The number's coming up on your screen. If you'd like to join our conversation, you're more than welcome to. Good evening.
No, Pat?
You're on the air, sir.
Yeah, I've got a few comments in this case. Those two girls may be 15 or 16, but street-wise, they're like 21 or 22, in my opinion. They've been around for their age.
Well, with the cigarettes in their hand and the gum chewing...
I realize that, but that's not the main point I'm trying to make out. Mr. Pinto has suffered immeasurably agonizing hours in the 2.5 years. It's cost him a lot of money for attorney's fees. But I don't want to be the judge in this case. If District Attorney O'Malley lets these two girls get off with a slap in the wrist and doesn't use stiff punishment as a deterrent for future cases like this, he's committing a grave mistake, because other girls will seize the opportunity to do the same thing, and knowing that they will probably get away with a slap in the wrist, and there's no deterrent there, like I say, he'll be committing a grave mistake if he doesn't punish them. Actually, throw the book at them. What the punishment is, I'm no judge, I'm no lawyer. But, like I say, all facts considered, the bottom line is a deterrent must be set to prevent a reoccurrence of this in the future. Because a slap in the wrist would just aggravate the issue and make things stand just as they are and do no good at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your call. Gentlemen, the point, just comparing the Dotson trial or the case itself, this happened in court. That did not. Their decision was already made, and the courts, I believe, of the state said, too bad. You know, the governor let him out, I understand. Here, it was done in court. They flip-flopped right there during the trial. Now, they did not hold the other person on perjury. Do you see a big difference?
No, I don't, and I think this one, to my way of thinking, is as grievous. Although the Dotson case, my recollection is that the fellow, Gary Dotson, did 6 years.
6 years.
Before she recanted, and then, too, I guess in that state it was difficult to accept the recantation of a witness without more. So the laws are a bit different than in Massachusetts. But here you've got two people. I mean, you compounded the error here, compounded the grievousness of the offense here by two people admitting to having perjured themselves. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in his right mind who wouldn't believe that the girls had, in fact, perjured themselves. And I see it as a more serious. If nothing is done, if it's a slap in the wrist, I think, as that gentleman said on the phone a short while ago, you'd be encouraging people to come in and say, if they wanted to, frivolously or otherwise, or through kookiness, to make accusations, knowing full well that they'll be punished. I find that to be offensive to my sense of fairness and decency, that should go unpunished.
Kevin, another tough question. Well, there's several, actually, and I want to get to, well, let's go back to the phones. The number's coming up on your screen. Actually, I forgot. I had the question all set, and I was so busy listening to what Pat had to say, I forgot it. Well, let's clear the air, then, once and for all. As the articles in the Enterprise and the various newspapers in New England carried it, and I'd say nationally also, there were some hints towards the end of the columns about threats of violence, about offers of money. Can you clear that up?
I never made any offer of money. I never threatened the girls in my life. None of that was ever done. All I remember is the last thing the mother was saying to me before we were at the junkyard is, if we can't resolve this here, we'll resolve it in court. I don't know what she meant by that. Whatever.
Can you go back with what junkyard we're talking about?
Well, it was part of it. Before I came to the lawyers, the mother, I'm not sure what she meant by it, but that's the statement that she made to me. I never offered them money. I never threatened them. I never did anything to those females. I was scared out of my wits. I didn't want nothing to do with them. I wasn't about to call them or anything. I was more concerned with the case than anything else.
Well, didn't Judge Wagner question the girls under oath again as to whether or not they received any threats?
Yeah, there were two things. I mean, number one, that a lot of that's being generated for the media right now. Judge Wagner asked both victims under oath, both on Tuesday on voir dire and then in front of the jury on Wednesday, whether the reason they were changing their testimony was because of threats. They both answered no. The other thing, which I find hard to believe, all this news of threats is coming up now. Mr. Pinto's bail was personal recognizance. It never changed throughout the 2 years. Now, why all of a sudden they're bringing up all this evidence of threats? It would be surprising that no judge in the 2-year period would not have taken action by revoking his bail and holding him in custody if, in fact, any of those...
planting the seed of doubt in the public's mind?
If, in fact, any of those threats were to be well-founded, he would not have been out on personal recognizance for a 2-year period. And now, all of a sudden, because they finally have changed their testimony, now we're hearing all this talk about threats, offers of money, things which are not founded, and which, if they had been, would have resulted in some change in his bail status.
That's called a derriere covering on the part of those people who feel somewhat guilty about it. But if
Is that
in
a
fact,
medical term?
Well, that's the euphemistic way of saying covering your fanny. If in fact they had been threats made, why did the girls testify when they did? They both testified. The threats supposedly never were made according to the girls. So I think it's a fabrication on someone's part to say the threats were made. It's categorically denied by Kevin Pinto. We've never heard of it till recently. It's a bunch of nonsense. No threats are ever made. It's, as I say, euphemistically speaking, it's cover your fanny time.
No. I never had $10,000 in my hand at one time anyways.
Not too many of us have. All right, the number's coming up on your screen. We still have a few minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, you're more than welcome to. My guests are Kevin Pinto, attorney Don Harwood, and attorney Pat Piscitelli. All right? We still have a couple of minutes if you'd like to get a comment in. I suppose people want to know what you're going to do now.
I think my lawyers are going to take care of that, and hopefully I'll get some satisfaction out of this. You know, I'm hoping for some type of satisfaction. You know, the thing that bothers me is, like you mentioned, that some innocent person could be charged again, like me, with a rape that never happened or whatever, because a female was mad at him at the time, you know, and I just hope, you know, some type of example. I'm not saying what should be done to him, but something I hope should be done to him, you know.
Well, what they've done to legitimate victims of rape is horrific in itself. Good evening. You're on the air.
Yes. Could you tell me what is it going to cost Kevin with attorney's fees and time off from work and bail? What will the total cost be?
Plenty.
Yeah, plenty is the answer to that. Can't relate that specifically, but in terms of torment and anguish and lack of peace of mind and the trauma that he and his family have gone through, I mean, there is no amount of money compensable for that suffering. In terms of...
Is the Moss and Frederick family liable?
Oh, sure. Sure, but how do you collect blood and stone? I mean, I wish they were multimillionaires because he's got a heck of a case, and Don and I talked about that, but you can't... if nothing else, as a matter of principle, you could get a judgment against it, but you couldn't collect it, I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much for your call, sir. I guess that about does it for us this evening. Thank you for coming on, and thank you, Kevin, and good luck.
Thank you.
You know, live long and prosper. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us by phone. I'm Pat Barnes.
And it says underneath that a true story of a nurse on trial for murder. And that nurse is a person who probably became very familiar to all of us, Anne Capute. She was on trial back in 1981 for fatally injecting a patient at Morton Hospital in Taunton, and she was cleared of that. With her this evening, we have the gentleman who wrote the book, Gary Provo, Fatal Dosage, as well as a man who's very well known here in our area, P.J. Piscitelli, Pat Piscitelli, the attorney and the person who got Anne Capute off. And let's turn to you first, I suppose. Thank you very much for joining us today. And
my pleasure.
Did you think you were going to get off?
I had no idea. I guess probably I knew I was just going with the best shot that I had.
Funny you should put it that way. The best shot that you had. The big shocker in this book, the one that is probably going to sell all the copies, is that you had a gun in your purse.
Yes.
The day that you were waiting for the verdict. You were going to shoot yourself if you were convicted.
Yes.
Why?
Probably my best answer for that is because I can't tolerate the thought of confinement. That's just, I can't possibly live like that. Not for a day.
You never spent any time in jail either, did you?
No, I didn't.
Because of this man here?
That's right.
Okay, Mr. Piscitelli, by the way, you were also invited to join this conversation. Our telephone number is 588-7894, 588-7894. We're going to be talking about the story of Anne Capute as well as the book and as well as Mr. Piscitelli and his role here. The book itself is an interesting book. I recommend it, and I don't usually recommend books like this. This was a lot of fun to read. It's a little slow in the beginning, I'll tell you. But I felt that once you actually hit the trial segment, I was able to whiz through it in less than an hour. And not because it was, you know, so easy to read, but because it was exciting. It moved very quickly. Why did you take this on?
Well, it struck me as having all the elements of good fiction, and to be true makes it, you know, it's a lot easier to sell a true story if it's compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And in this story, as you know, we have medical intrigue, we have a courtroom drama, all these things that usually sell books even when they're not true, and to find it in a true story, plus having a woman at the center of the story.
Mm-hmm. Is that important?
Really,
having a woman
at the center? I think it's not essential, but women buy most of the books, so it's an advantage to have a woman rather than a man at the center of the book for a book like that, because women do buy most of the books.
Do you target a specific audience? You say, well, I want to have some of the people between 25 and 45 read this book?
No, not at all. But I think realistically, there's a lot of nurses who will buy the book. People who identify with the subject will buy the book more.
Mm-hmm.
And since 60% of the books are being bought by women, it means you have more potential buyers who identify with the subject. I think, you know, it's a book that's of great appeal to men, because we have a lawyer at the center, too, a male lawyer. And I like to play that up, too. You know.
Absolutely. It's interesting. You almost deify Mr. Piscitelli in the book. In the book, it seems as if you can do no wrong, Pat. I don't know whether that's true. I followed the case. You have an incredible reputation in this area, certainly. When you first read the book, or did you follow it chapter by chapter by chapter, what did you think of his portrayal of your character?
Oh, as I told Gary, I thought it was overly flattering, and I did think it was all warranted. It's very nice to have nice things said about you, but I just didn't think it was all warranted. But I suppose the bottom line is we won, and the proof of the pudding is in the bottom line. But I felt throughout the trial that many things I felt had little failings in, but and when you look back and say overall it came out quite well, so I guess you've got to say it was successful.
Why go through it now again?
Strictly my point in collaborating with Gary on this is from a financial point of view. I am just incredibly overwhelmed with financial problems, and I'm still paying off a second mortgage for my legal fees.
How much were your legal fees altogether?
God only knows.
You jumped at that one.
Some exorbitant amount. They would have been much more had she been able to afford paying exactly what we did for her, but we worked out.
What did you mean by that?
We worked. What I mean is that we spent more time and monies in the trial itself than was paid for. So we worked out as best we could with what we could get for her. If Anne was a multimillionaire, she would have paid $500,000 for the type of defense we had, where I had several people in my office working constantly on it. But ours was a labor of love for Anne. We just felt that she was not guilty and she was being accused unjustly. And
did you think that from the beginning, though, Pat?
I didn't know, except that I read in the papers what was going on, and I just thought that it didn't appear to me as if she was guilty of anything, but I didn't know until I met her and talked to her. And it didn't take long for the story to unfold and for me to realize that there was no way in this God's little green earth that Anne was guilty of anything.
Now, this was after, though, you'd actually sat down and spoken with her. When she was initially accused, there was quite a period lapsed between she actually came to you and the actual accusal, right? About how long?
Oh, gosh, several months, 8 or 9 months after she had, I think, other counsel representing her, and then finally came to me, as the book relates. And I only knew about the case what I'd read in the papers, and I'd read about certain statements which had been attributed to her, which could have been interpreted two ways, but which were interpreted the wrong way by the prosecutorial people. And it made it appear as if she was guilty of something when you read the papers, but her side had never been told, and her side had never come to the fore. And
did you, when you read the newspapers, did you say, oh, if I could speak to this woman, I could do this better than anybody else. I could make her, I could make sure that everyone knew she was innocent.
I thought that way. I thought that I could get her off if I had her case. I thought she wasn't guilty. I didn't know, but until I talked to her, and then I was sure of it. And I had the fashion of defense.
What about him? Meeting a man like this for the first time, did you know he was the one that was going to save your neck on this one?
Not right away. But he came highly recommended by a very dear friend. And I think it probably was 3 or 4 months working with him that I saw that if I went down the tube, I was going with the best possible person I could go with.
One of the things that I found as a shocker in the book was, you have to excuse me just a second, Mr. Piscitelli, okay? I'm going to slam you here for a second. He said, fine, I'd love to take your case. I need $40,000.
20, wasn't it?
I think
was it 20? Excuse me.
It was 20.
20 and 40, they're basically the same, one and the same when you get right down to it. You know, it might have been $1 million. You know, someone comes up to me, I think you're innocent, but I need X number of dollars. How did they, I mean, did you think you'd ever be able to take care of that?
I still haven't been able to take care of that. That's my purpose for the role in the book. I was lucky enough that my in-laws came through for me, and that debt took the form of a second mortgage, which I'm still trying to repay.
Okay, all right, now that's, I wasn't sure. So that was just like an upfront, that wasn't just an upfront money, that was the overall expenditures basically as to what it cost.
Well,
other people are curious. I don't want to get into your personal life, Pat, believe me, all right? Now, we don't want to check your finances here, but I think people are curious as to how much something like this costs.
Well, when you take on a case like this, Bob, you've got to get expert witnesses. You've got to get people who are possessing the expertise to counteract those experts whom the Commonwealth will produce. And you get a doctor who's a cardiologist, you get a doctor who's a pathologist, you get an oncologist who can tell you about cancer. Those guys charge you big bucks per hour. You're talking spending $20,000 for experts alone. So that when you prepare a case like this, what I needed was just money to pay for the proposed experts, which I knew I'd have to get. I mean, that didn't cover legal fees. I knew that, but I knew for sure that this girl wasn't guilty.
And that's really the important thing, getting her off.
Yeah, I was dead set on getting her off.
I don't want to get into the trial just yet. Let's get into that in a little bit. Let's talk about the book a little bit more. But I do want to talk about the trial and Mr. Pina and how you defended her, and I thought that was very exciting in the book itself. Gary, now your involvement in this, you come from the Worcester area. We were talking about this just a few moments ago. You probably followed it like everybody else in Massachusetts. Why did you think that this would be a good book for you? Well, other than, I know you explained a few moments ago.
Well, again, when I think of a good book for me, I think in terms of what's a good book for the readers, and the reality is that very few trials, relatively few trials, really have a sympathetic defendant. Most people go on trial are probably guilty of something. There's a pretty good chance that they did it, because there's a lot of people seem to think they do. And it's very hard to write a book about a trial without someone to root for the reader to root for. In this case, we had someone who it seemed to me was quite clearly being victimized by a couple of rather large establishments. That's the heart of a good book, someone you can root for, someone you can care about, if you're going to write it like this, like a novel. So that was very attractive.
Were you conceptualizing that as the trial went on itself?
I think probably I was, yeah. And I, like most writers, you see something like this and you say, well, I won't look into it because I'm sure somebody's already doing a book already. You just assume, you know, somebody was one of the reporters or somebody. And time went by and time went by. I didn't see any book come out. So I had time to look into it, find out.
How did you finally get in touch with these two individuals?
Actually, it turns out we had a friend in common, a woman by the name of Mary Bauer, who teaches at Emerson College. And she knew both of us and put us together.
Now, did you spend many hours going over the testimony? Obviously, what's in here is just literally a smattering of what went on in the courtroom.
I went to Pat's office. I didn't know much about trials and what goes into it. And so he takes me in the room to show me the research, the material that's accumulated in the trial. And it's like a pile, you know, from here all the way across the room, lined across, you know, several feet of folders and books and depositions. That's not even counting the transcript. And then when I got the transcript, it comes up to about here, about 25 volumes it was. So I had a lot of reading to do. So I read through the transcripts almost like reading this huge novel written entirely in dialogue. And it's kind of compelling. It is interesting if you're doing it as research. I don't know if the average person wants to read 25 volumes of transcript. Because, you know, each question has to be so precise. The lawyer doesn't have the advantage. The writer can compress information. The lawyer has to say, you know, did you meet Joe Smith? Did you meet him in Brockton? Did you meet him on the 5th of December? The writer can say, he met Joe Smith on the 5th of December in Brockton. And so that's compressing the transcript.
Did you go through all the volumes?
Yeah. I remember reading them, yeah.
How did you select the poignant passages in here that...
I look for emotional content. Look for tension. Dialogue has to create tension. The times when Pat's cross-examining somebody and there's something else going on, some sort of subtext going on. And I look for the questions that contain the most information or the answers that contain the most information. There's a lot of repetition in the transcript. I mean, the same question can get asked 12 times in different ways. I wouldn't put it in 12 times, I put it in once.
Did you have help from Mr. Piscitelli here?
Oh yeah, I asked him procedure, what does this mean? You know, why, you know, have a bench conference, what's going on? Try to straighten out some of the Latin terms. You know, so I did a lot of talking back and forth with Pat, trying to understand the trial in a layman's way so that I could now interpret it for lay people, what's going on.
Do you feel like you were successful in that?
Yeah, I do. I think so. The response to the book's been good, and people seem to, I think people have a pretty good understanding of what someone like Pat does from that.
How has the response to this book been?
Well, it's only been on a short time, but as near as I can tell, it's very good. I've talked to people at Walden Books, which is the biggest chain in the country. Some of them have it right up front. They're giving it a good play. We're getting a lot of publicity coming up. A lot of people I talked to have heard of the book, read it. So it seems to be going quite well. It's too early to have any real figures yet. You know.
What did you think of when you read the book, Anne? I mean, finally afterwards, did you read it as it was going on?
No. I sat down and read it. It only took me probably 2.5, 3 hours to zip through it. And because it is fast reading,
Really
and it does start off a little bit slow, but then it moves right along.
He has to build all the characters, is what he's doing, obviously.
And I found he gave it a pretty good representative of what went on.
Did you feel like the emotional content was there?
Yes, from my point of view, yes.
Do you feel like he captured Anne Capute? I thought that was the...
Pretty well.
Pretty well? How come only pretty well?
Well, like as transcript would be repetitious, so would my my nights, you know, between days in court be too repetitious to put in. But he did get a smattering here and there about, you know, naturally I spent a good many sleepless nights and exactly what I was doing, and you know, I was very, in some ways I was very removed from my family and friends because it was a world that only I was really living in.
It's interesting. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the book was the, towards the end, it seemed like the relationship between you two really gelled. Some of the parts that I really enjoyed in there was the descriptions of your car rides back from the trial and stopping to get the chocolate bars and like a bunch of little kids running out, and that, I thought that summed up a real relationship.
That was a marriage. I mean, a 4-person marriage.
Yeah.
It really was. Pat, myself, Donald Howard, James Morton. It was a marriage. There's no two ways about it in my mind.
It's difficult to relate exactly what went through our minds in those days because we had highs and lows throughout the trial. You'd have evidence against you which was extremely devastating, which was upsetting, and Anne would be really down the dumps as we rode back some days, and other days would have highs. And when the evidence was good, or the cross-examination might have gone well, and we made our points. And then, too, I had Don Howard and James Morton from my office, and they were, top-notch guys in helping prepare the case and in keeping spirits up and always being there to assist. And they, especially Don Howard, who has a tremendous sense of humor and kept us all laughing. And she had, despite all, she kept my spirits up. For a woman on trial, could have gone to jail for life. She kept my spirits up. The sense of humor of all people involved was just stratospheric, and it helps immensely. Until you've been through a murder case, either as a defendant with your life about to go down the tubes, or you tried one, it's difficult to convey the feelings.
Do you think this book succeeds at that?
Yeah, I think it does. I think I was moved by certain passages in certain areas, and I relived it in my mind, and he caught it quite well. He caught the essence of each of the persons, too. I'm surprised how well he did that.
Do you think that he drew Mr. Pino well? That was the only question that I might have had, the district attorney.
Yeah, I think Ron Pino comes off well, because I thought he did a good job, especially his opening statement was really one that shook us up a bit. In fact, I wasn't going to make an opening statement at the outset, but he came on so well, so strong, that I said, boy, he's created an aura that this woman whom he pointed at, this murderess, for some 56 minutes to an hour, he opened up and gave a devastating opening. So I thought I had to chill it a bit. And at the end, his summation was excellent.
Let's take a telephone call. This is a two-way talk show. I got a feeling we're going to get so lost in this thing, we may not take that many. Give us a call, 588-7894, or a chance to speak with Pat Piscitelli, Anne Capute, and Gary Provo. Speaking about the new book, if you haven't read it, that's fine too. It's a chance to speak with a woman whose life was, I don't know anybody. I don't think I've ever met anybody, Anne, that went through what you've gone through.
Neither have I.
I'm sure. I don't know that it's a tough thing, very tough thing. Hi, you're on the air.
And I followed Anne Capute's case in the paper, and I felt quite sympathetic towards her. But after reading the book, I felt a lot less sympathetic towards her, for the fact,
okay.
I thought first she was kind of nailed by the doctor, and after reading the book and seeing how much morphine she gave the patient, I'm wondering why she didn't. There are other methods to treat pain, like other medications, like Dilaudid or. A morphine drip would even be preferable to what she gave the patient, in my opinion.
All right, you want to talk about it, Anne, a little bit?
Were you aware of these alternatives?
I am aware of the alternatives. I am not, morphine drip or Dilaudid wasn't ordered. Morphine by injection was.
I just, and the other thing that bothered me about the book, in the opening chapter, you said you would be called down to the nurse's station, the nurse's office.
Right.
And you said you thought you were being nailed on giving a codeine to a nursing assistant.
That's right.
And, being a nurse, I would never give a narcotic to myself or another nurse unless, if she was in that much pain, why didn't she go to the emergency room or whatever to be treated properly?
She should have. I should have had her do that.
It just makes me feel as a nurse, I know your intentions are good, and I really got the impression from the book that you are a caring person, and that you really, tried in the best interest to take care of Mrs. Renew. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Linus.
Yeah. But I just felt your judgment sometimes was a little bit poor. But we all make mistakes.
Perhaps it was.
Yeah.
That's, hindsight is great.
Of course.
It truly is.
I just felt, it was a good book, and, I just feel sometimes nurses are put down, and, I don't think you got the support from the system that you should have, too. The nursing system.
You nurses are overworked and underpaid, and I have great admiration for you all.
But,
and,
I just, out of everybody, you got nailed for it, It seems like there should have been more given to you.
Like what? Be more specific.
Okay, she had the order for the morphine,
Right.
In my opinion, it was inappropriate order.
An inappropriate order.
The doctor, it should have had either a time limit on it, or if the patient wasn't getting relief from the medication, that what I would have done is maybe called the doctor up and had the dosage increased or changed or whatever. But it doesn't seem like the charge nurse or the supervisor or anybody took an interest in this case.
I thought it was pretty apparent from the book, and obviously I'm not a nurse, that it was a common practice for verbal...
That's true.
And that's what was stressed in the book, and that's what, you know, the common practice was really on trial.
In my opinion, something like that, a doctor, you know, you shouldn't take a verbal order, but it was common practice there. Therefore, that system wasn't supportive of her. If it was a better system, that would have never happened to her. That's what I'm trying to say.
Let me ask you a question, caller. Were you a nurse when Anne was on trial?
Yes, I was.
One of the things that in the book that really struck me was at the end of the book when, I forget exactly where it was, you go into the room for the party and all the flowers were from nurses, or a lot of the flowers from nurses. That raised chills in the back of my... How come the nurses didn't support her during the trial itself?
Maybe they did, but I wasn't aware of it at all.
Oh, I'll tell you, I couldn't get to talk to some of the nurses. I tried to talk to many of the nurses involved in the trial, and they were reluctant to talk to me because I think they were fearful of becoming involved in the criticism which might be leveled at them. Plus the fact they're afraid of their jobs.
Not just the Morton Hospital nurses, though, but how about the nurses in the Commonwealth?
Well, you can't blame them because, you know, it's that there but for the grace of God go I syndrome. They're afraid to become involved. I can't blame them. But the outpouring of feeling and affection for Anne after this trial was over was just immense. We went into Christo's restaurant down in Brockton for dinner that evening. And if this is related to the book, and it's very true. 1 minute after we walked in, a lot of Brockton Hospital nurses, go there. We were there about 8 or 9 o'clock, whatever time it was. We walked in, and within 1 minute after, someone started applauding, and more applause. Pretty soon, the entire place was standing up applauding her. She had to get up and wave back. I was just overwhelmed to see, because most of them were young people, and you knew there were nurses in the area. Some of them were in their uniform. So I knew that latent feeling was there, and there was that tremendous outpouring right after the trial. People who wanted to say, Anne, we're with you, but who couldn't, and she didn't know this throughout that time.
Do you think that, caller, let me ask you a final question. Do you think that Anne helped the cause of nursing, or was a detriment to it?
I see a positive side and a negative side to it. The positive side would be, it showed that she was caring and dedicated nurse. But the negative side to it was maybe that she did show bad judgment. But I really think the system didn't support her. I mean, they should have had definite rules like maybe no verbal orders or whatever. And as a charge nurse that I've been in, I would question her giving that amount of morphine. And, under no circumstances should a patient be in that much pain. I think Anne reacted to that, seeing a patient in pain. And, I can't bear to see a person, suffering like that. And I think to the best of her ability, that's what she was trying to do. But I do think there are other alternatives. I think she got nailed in the middle of the situation. She wasn't supported by the system. And if it was the system's policy to accept verbal orders, then they should have supported Anne. They should have made her the scapegoat out of the whole thing.
And the order should have been signed within 24 hours or shortly thereafter, after it was put in that in big, bold, black print on the doctor's order form. The doctor left to Europe for 10 days that same or the next day. Never signed it. It was there the next day, could have signed it, but didn't.
One last thing, what amazed me is that I got the impression from the book, no doctor came to see this woman until she died after, and I think that's terrible too, that somebody, a MD should have come and evaluated this, person rather than leaving it in the nurse's hands. Once again, the nurses were left holding the bag. And she, all she was trying to do was help somebody.
Thank you very much for your phone call.
Thank you.
You want to say something?
Probably my biggest response, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to get it in at the same time before she left, was that although, yes, I accepted and carried out the order, I didn't carry out the whole thing, and I wasn't the one that took the order. I was not the charge nurse, far from it. And that order was written out, even though it was a verbal order, by someone else, the charge nurse, who was mine at the time. And not only did I accept it, she also, and there were several others that accepted it.
Let's take a break right now. When we come back, let's talk about the actual trial and what happened and see if we can't drum up some interest in your book, because it's a good book. And if it'll help you pay for your bills, it's even a better cause, right? Our telephone number is 588-7894. This is a live call-in talk show. Our telephone number is 588-7894. Give us a call. My guests this evening are Anne Capute. She is the nurse who was on trial for a nurse, as well as the author of a brand new book, Gary Provo, who wrote Fatal Dosage, the true story of a nurse on trial for murder, and her attorney, Pat Piscitelli, P.J. Piscitelli, a man who's well known in our area. So give us a call, join our conversation. 588-7894 is the telephone number. Let's go to the trial itself. One of the things that is mentioned in the book, and I mentioned it during the break here, and you said, well, I'll get to it in a second, was that Mr. Pina, the DA, was trying it in the press. It seems to me, though, that once you got a hold of the case too, Pat, the press was everywhere. The whole thing was on television every night. Weren't you, in fact, trying it in the press also?
Oh, no. I think what you're doing is not stating it properly as what's contained in that book.
Okay.
It was being tried in the press, I think, by the prosecution because they were talking on the courthouse steps and giving statements, and doctors' opinions were being quoted as to what the woman died of, that is by an overdose of morphine and so forth. The TV which was given, the TV coverage given to this trial was as a result of an experiment which was being conducted in Massachusetts for TV in the courtroom. It was one of the first times that a trial was going to be televised in its entirety. And it was every night. That was no doing of ours. That was through an experiment which was allowed by the court. So that what you saw was what was happening or unfolding, the drama that took place in the courtroom, what was recorded and reported by the TV media. When I get involved in the case, my instructions to Anne were, you just keep your mouth shut, let me play lawyer, you play innocent client. As long as we know our responsibilities, that's how I'll represent you. And she was not to talk to the press and make any statements, which she had been doing prior to my becoming involved, because it's my policy that if she has enough confidence to lay her life on the line in my hands, then she's got to follow my instructions, or she can use someone else as a lawyer. It's that simple. I do that in every case. And she did. She did, and because she wanted to many times express her feelings to the Linus family, express her sympathies, and go over and console Mr. Linus to say something, but it was through my urging that she did not. So I wasn't trying it in the press. I became involved 9 months after she first was indicted, as I recall, roughly that time, and then I prepared for a trial which happened to be covered widespread by the TV media.
Do you think that this would have been as controversial, that a book would be written today if that camera wasn't in the courtroom every day? Would this have just kind of been slid by?
Maybe not. It's difficult to say. In retrospect now, my feeling is that it was as fascinating then, but it would not have been given all the coverage. Obviously not. I think TV gives you such widespread coverage, and you've got millions of people who are seeing it, if not at the moment, sometime shortly thereafter. And of course the interest is aroused by virtue of that all-seeing eye.
One of the things that is stressed in the beginning of the book, that perhaps this might have been a political stepping stone for the DA. He was going to use you to get himself in Congress. And of course, that never happened, of course. Do you still believe that?
I didn't express that view. It crossed my mind, though, that any DA, since it's a political office and he's subject to constituents who either keep him there or who expedite his demise, his political demise, he has to cater to them.
I guess what I'm saying, though, is that if he's going to do that and he's going to make it work, he has to try this on a grand scale.
It was.
I thought it was rather a grand scale.
We thought it was.
But then you had to do the same thing. You had to try it on a grand scale yourself.
Well, you have to fight fire with fire. You can't just sit back and be trod upon and not tread back. That's my approach to trial cases.
Do you try every case the way that you try this case?
Obviously not. So. Yeah, I like to think so. The preparation was great in this case because of all the. We were 9 months in arrears when I became involved.
Right.
And you got to go through tremendous amounts of jury transcript, talk to doctors, learn medicine, learn pathology, learn oncology. I've got to find out go through hospital records and nurses' notes, narcotic sheets, medication records, doctor's order forms, learn all of the abbreviations. I mean, I talked to Anne hours on end. I knew a little bit about it from all other murder cases I tried, but yeah, great to the preparation because of the medical involvement in this case.
I was fairly staggered by the discussions in here about your family when they would talk about you getting 3 4 hours of sleep a night at the most, and then, you know, getting up at 3 in the morning, getting up at 4 in the morning to prepare your transcripts for that day, to prepare your questions. And this case went on for how long?
7 weeks of trial, 6.5, 7 weeks of trial. I don't get much sleep at night. I bothered Anne all hours of the night when things cropped up in my mind. She can attest to that.
That's all right. I wasn't getting much sleep either, so.
Yeah.
But I do remember his some of his phone calls around 2 in the morning.
It's how do you go into a courtroom and go through, take one witness, put it on the stand, put her on the stand, like your nursing supervisor, I believe that's who it was?
The director of nurses.
The director of nurses.
Yes.
Thank you very much. You had her on the stand for 3 days. Now, were you specifically looking for one thing when you put them on the stand, a 3-day period? Are you looking to build to a certain point where finally you can take it and go, this is what I want?
Well, what I was looking for from her, remember, I was given in advance the notes, the statements that she had made.
Right.
I got that upon discovery from the DA. And Anne had made statements to her over the course of an hour and a half. So what I intended to do with her was to elicit from Maureen Costello, who was the nursing supervisor at the time, Anne's statements and put them in proper context. And if I could do that, I could avoid putting Anne on the stand to speak for herself, because I would have given to the jury her statements at a time when she had no lawyer, she had no reason to fabricate, had no murder indictment pending, so her story came out at a time which was very close in time to the time the death occurred, within a matter of 2 or 3 days. And also, I want to bring up from her many other things about how the hospital treated her. They said that hers and the hospital's interests diverged. Get yourself a lawyer, which I thought was callous. And I want to.
That was all they said, too. That was the sentence they gave you?
That's verbatim.
That's verbatim.
Sure, that's in the notes. She said that at one point they said to Anne, your interests and that of the hospital have diverged. Now, that's an abandonment of the nurse at that point. I thought that was rather callous. And I want to drag all that stuff out and make them aware that his Anne left floundering. Poor LPN, the low person on the totem pole, low person on the medical and nursing hierarchy, is left to float adrift with a murder indictment pending. I just thought that that was the most overbearing happening that could have taken place.
Did you feel like you were able to actually convince the jury then, and the people who will they'll read this book, I suppose, that it was actually the hospital that was at fault here and not Anne Capute?
Well, I think the focus was played upon both the hospital and the doctor and all others who had occasion to see the nursing records and did nothing about it. Because the doctor's order form was there for several days and no one complained. There were other nurses who were in charge of her who did the same thing, no complaints. There were procedures and practices at the Morton Hospital which have been going on for the longest time, and it was accepted as normal procedure to give large amounts of morphine to terminal patients, imminently terminal patients. Doctors gave DWD orders, which are death with dignity orders. They gave no code orders, which means don't make heroic efforts to resuscitate a person if that person is known to be terminal and is imminently about to expire. I mean, that was done. And suddenly, to leave her adrift and say that she is at fault in this case, she becomes a scapegoat. It bothered me. It bothers anybody who likes underdogs, and I just like underdogs.
Did you know from the beginning that they would give immunity to the 4 people from the hospital staff?
No, in fact, Ron Pina, when I went to see him, gave me those 4 letters because it was exculpatory. You say exculpatory material.
What does that mean?
Material which is tends to prove innocence of the party charged. In other words, if they gave immunity, which they did, they gave immunity to 4 of the administrators.
Sure.
The top people, the top dogs, were given immunity, and no matter what the as I recall now, and I'll stand corrected if I'm misstating, my recollection is that no matter what the grand jury did, they would be prosecuted for nothing. Now you have the nursing administrator, the person in charge, to whom Anne, was responsible, in charge of this entire administration. You had I think the personnel director also was involved. You had one of the nursing supervisors involved, who was given complete immunity. I just thought that was unfair, blatantly unfair.
Why does a case like this come about then? Why did this actually come about? If it was going on with other individuals, why did they decide this woman is the one, we're going to take her and we're going to place her outside, and she'll be the one we'll take on, she's the one we'll put on trial?
If we could have answered that question at the outset, we would have avoided trial.
That's true.
But why now? Looking back, hindsight, it's 4 years back. Why did they pick you, Anne?
I don't know. I don't think anybody had it in for me or anything like that. Why, I'll never really know, probably.
Death with dignity, that's a big part in this book. The woman was going to die. It was common to have orders where just to take care of that person's pain.
Yes.
And you would just keep giving them the morphine until the pain subsided.
I can't zero in specifically on morphine.
Okay.
But yes, there were very high dosages of narcotics administered to people that were terminally, imminently about to die, to make them comfortable.
Did it ever cross your mind at all that perhaps I'm killing this person? This person is going to die because of the morphine?
No. I have to say that. No, I never sat down and said, well, wait a minute. But if you want to examine that, at that time, you say, are they going to die of morphine, or are they going to go screaming like a poor animal that's been struck by a car or something? I mean, which way would you rather go? I mean, I suppose I've thought that very thought about myself. I certainly would want to go with as little pain as possible, as long as I had to go.
Do you think that the family of the woman's name is Mrs. Lemuel?
Linus.
Linus, excuse me. Do you think that they understand, now that you've been exonerated, that you perhaps weren't the cause for?
I have no way of knowing that, even beginning to presume it. I don't know.
Have you ever spoken to them at all?
No.
Reading that and the confusion that surrounds this book about the whole drug situation, about whether or not the doctor said you're supposed to only give 15 milligrams of morphine every 3 hours, how it's supposed to be put in, what other drugs are supposed to be given. Was that common at the hospital, that there was just this air of basically you do what you're told, but it's not always written down, not always spelled out to you?
I think there was a lot of leeway given on some of the orders that the doctors wrote. There was round-the-clock medications, which if you speak to other nurses will say, no way would they do such a thing, and you wouldn't wake a patient to give them a narcotic. It's like the old cliche of waking up the patient to give them a sleeping pill. But I have seen, and they are documented, actual orders where there was no choice. That doctor said, you give this, round the clock, I don't care if the patient's asleep, jumping on the walls or what. This is what I want them to have. And they were increasingly higher and higher dosages.
Did you feel like they really let you down at the hospital?
Yeah, I did. I really felt I was cut adrift from the main ship, really. And I think probably the worst part for me in that interim was that I had no idea what was going on. I really didn't know. I thought I was the only person that was cut loose from the ship. I didn't know that anyone else had been suspended, fired, whatever. I had no idea of other dosages that were given. I began to feel like I was the only one that gave higher dosages, and that was it. And I kept thinking, well, what happened with all those other patients that enormous amounts of medication was given to at that time? What happened with all of those, and what was peculiar that I'm being cut away from the ship here? And there wasn't any answers coming my way.
And in addition, when she was severed, remember the 3 nurses were indicted for murder, and the prosecution filed, or the other 2 filed a motion to sever, and the DA then decided to try Anne alone first. So she felt all the more alone. There were 2 other nurses going with her, lied with her. At least she had some consolation. But now she's suddenly alone against the entire establishment.
Initially, it was 4 nurses that were suspended, though, and the 4th nurse was reinstated, and that's never really Explain why.
Well, why they ever suspended her in the first place, I'll never know, because I think she gave some morphine about 24 hours before. She gave 30 milligrams of morphine rather than 15, some 24 hours before, if I recall correctly. I could never understand in the world why she would be involved. In fact, one of the other two nurses gave morphine about something like that too, and they finally, her involvement was so minimal. And the other nurse who was indicted with Anne was the one who gave the same amount of morphine, the last dose, within an hour and 15 minutes after Anne had left the hospital, which Mrs. Costello had never told.
But yet they chose Anne to be put on trial first. Let's take a phone call here. Hi, you're on the air.
Hey, good evening. How you doing?
Pretty good. Yourself?
May I speak to a lawyer for a minute?
Absolutely.
How you doing?
Hi.
This is your friend, Mr. Dillon? John Dillon?
I'm sorry?
I think you remember me, Mr. Dillon, John Dillon?
Sounds familiar, John, yes.
Hi. How much problem when she wanted to go through writing this book, how much trouble did she have putting this book through?
Well, we actually talked to 5 different authors, and Gary came to us. We had samples of each person's writing, and some were just not the type of writing that any of us liked, and for reasons, whatever reasons there were, we finally decided on Gary after going through several months of talking to people, and Anne sat down with him as the final determiner and decided that she liked him, she liked his style, and thought he'd do a good job, and I think she's right.
Well, that's very good. I mean, you've had a couple cases that you handled, and I think you've done a pretty good job.
We had, I told Anne this, I had 2 other cases which I tried, which I represented people on. I represented Albert DeSalvo. We had a book going on him, and he got stabbed at Walpole State Prison. I represented Carl Eisen, who was accused of double-hatchet murder, and within 8 months after his case was over, he committed suicide, had a book in the works. I told Anne, you're the third, please be careful, even crossing the streets.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What about this fellow that's in Bridgewater now? You remember Oceanic molested the 3 kids and killed them, burned them up in Seals Park?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
Olson, he was from Brockton. He killed 3 boys and buried them, and then tried to kill them with a fire. He's in Bridgewater now. Wouldn't that be a good story and a good movie for Brockton?
I don't know that much about it, but I'm sure if it is, Gary will hopefully call Gary, the author of Fatal Dosage. And
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your phone call. Our telephone number is 588-7894, 588-7894. We're speaking about fatal dosage. I guess that's why we're here now. The true story of a nurse who's on trial for murder, Anne Capute, and Gary Provo wrote this. Pat Piscitelli was the lawyer. What do you say? Let's take a break right now. Is that okay? All right, let's take a break right now. We'll be back in just a few moments, and join us. Our telephone number is 588-7894. I'm trying to figure out which direction we want to go right now. Here we have a telephone call coming up in just a second. Would you ever use Mr. Piscitelli again, just as a normal? Is he your lawyer?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, yeah?
Yeah, he is.
I mean, you've obviously, in the book, it's a major bond between the two of you.
Definitely.
Do you think if it was another lawyer that you would have not done as well, not fared as well in the 2 charges against you?
I can't believe that I would have.
We do have a telephone call. Okay, let's take it. Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, good evening, Bob. I'd like to speak to Pat, please.
Yes.
You got him.
Pat.
Yes.
I can just about hear him.
Sorry. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. Pat, that time frame of that trial, I had a brother-in-law that was in the hospital, young. He was in his very early 40s. And he was dying of cancer. He had an inoperable tumor in his stomach, and he looked, if you could be, about 15 months pregnant. And we had stayed at the hospital day and night. The hospital was north of Brockton, the 128 area. And he was on morphine. They had given him 6 months to live, and he died within 2 weeks. But when Anne was found innocent, was the time he was put in the hospital, and they were giving him morphine, and he was in a tremendous amount of pain, and the doctor wouldn't increase the morphine on account of this trial that had just taken place, which was very sad because I don't think my brother-in-law was the only one that had to suffer because of, you know, that trial. But my brother is a physician. He lives in California, and he also has a license to practice in Massachusetts. And he took over the case at the time, and he administered enough morphine to my brother-in-law to kill the pain. And what had complicated it was he had had kidney failure and was on a dialysis machine for about 8 or 9 years. And because of the pain from the cancer and his system not functioning, his kidneys failed. He couldn't go on the dialysis machine, and the cause of death was not cancer, or the cause of death was drowning, because where he couldn't urinate, the fluid was just filling up in his system. But I just want to let you know that I'm glad Anne got off, but the consequences of a lot of patients that were dying of cancer after that time, a lot of them suffered on account of it because of the physicians being so scared, and I'm glad it came out the way it did.
It's ironic. It's ironic.
Yes. In fact, my brother had been following the trial, and he had said something to the doctor at the time, you know, about the morphine. Now, Anne, I think, would be familiar with it. It had the bag of morphine, the intravenous, but it also had a box with dials on it. And I guess it was, you could set it at a fast or a slow rate as opposed to just the gravity feed of dripping. And the doctor had explained to my brother, due to this case, that there was such a fear of lawsuits that he wasn't going to administer any more except for the basic dosage. And it was kind of sad, you know. I don't think the district attorneys understand, I don't think the judges understand, but you're standing on the side of a bed, you take a grown man that comes up out of the bed, puts his arm around your neck and pulls you down in bed, and the man is crying because of the pain. It was just a sickening, sad thing to see. And I'm just glad my brother was there and was a physician, and he took over and he administered the morphine. But as Anne said, I would rather die unconscious and not know what pain is than to lay there, as she said, by the same as a dog being hit by a car. I just wanted to relate that little story to you.
Thank you very much.
All right, Bob. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Now that's the flip side. That's the side actually I never considered. Have you run into that before?
I've heard a lot of that happened at the time, and God, I'm so sorry for those people out there that weren't medicated because of fear, but they have to live with that.
And many nurses who would not give medication unless the doctor countersigned within a short period thereafter. I've heard stories of that. We heard nurses who told us that they'd be fearful that a doctor who had given a verbal order, which was signed by the nurse, may come back and say, wait a minute, I didn't tell you to give that much, or something untoward happened. And right now what it's done is caused a more strict enforcement of the countersigning of an order by a doctor, because nurses were very afraid to do it at that point.
That's a very positive move for everybody, though, for the doctors, the nurses, and the patients.
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's take another telephone call here. We're getting accused way over the shoulder tonight here. Hi, you're on the air. Hello? Do we have them? Hi, you're on the air. I don't think we do have them. We lost them somehow. Let me turn that off. Maybe we can take care of that problem. Big time television here. We'll get to it in just a few seconds. If you could do it all again, would you go back to the hospital? Would you give the medication as you did before? I mean, that's such a stupid question, really. But I mean, you must look back at that 1,000 times ago. My God, if only I had never worked on that floor. My God, if only I had never seen that woman.
I don't know. I really don't go back to those kind of things because they are stupid. You can't change what's already been. You can't.
Mm-hmm.
All I can say is Dr. Hillier, if I could go back, would never have left that floor that night without signing that order.
Have you spoken to Dr. Hilliard after all this?
No, he never calls. Never calls, never sends a card, Christmas, birthdays, nothing.
Just amazing, isn't it?
I just can't understand it.
You have to read the book really to kind of understand that. The man does not come across very well in the book. you don't paint negative portraits of anybody, really. If you were looking to make a villain, there are a number of villains you could certainly, you could make fire-breathing dragons out of some of these people in the book, but you don't do that. Dr. Hilliard would be one of them.
Obviously.
Obviously, you have to read the book to understand. I was just amazed by the incompetence that was running through large portions of it. Why didn't you really, you could have made her more sympathetic by
it was
painting.
very easy to have written that book in stereotypes.
Yeah.
The villainous doctor, the ambitious district attorney, the poor.
Exactly.
That wouldn't have been very good. People were realistic. They know that nobody is all black or all white. Anne in the book is not a hero. I mean, she's a hero, but there's a lot of negative stuff about Anne. And even Pat, you know, was saying that Pat looks great. The fact is, there's a whole section there about a negative part of Pat, and that was he was having some difficulty meeting his family obligations. He was so tied up in the trial, and so that's an Achilles heel for him. Hilliard, the same thing. There's good and bad. I mean, Hilliard is apparently an extremely well-educated man. His credentials are quite impressive as a doctor. But if you read the book, you see that he has his failings. Same thing with District Attorney Pena. We talked about him being politically ambitious. We also talked about him being very competent. He did a really good job for a man who was really, I think it was his first murder trial. And so nobody is all black or white, but it's both. And I think that makes for a more realistic story.
Why did you decide to use the whole smoking gun, the suicide, what would have been a suicide if the guilty verdict would have come in? That is so sensational.
Yeah, I think most of all the story, to me, again, the story is character. The important thing in the story was how did this affect this woman? What were her emotions? Her emotions were the key thing here, not the trial. How did she feel about the trial? How did it affect her? The gun tells you everything about her emotions. Here's a woman who, you know, the way she saw it, to any sentence was a death sentence, it says, because if she were being sent to prison even for a year, she would have killed herself. And the fact that the gun was there is extremely telling about that.
Why didn't you tell Pat right after the trial? You didn't. You didn't tell him for quite a period.
That's right.
Why didn't you do that?
Why?
Why?
No need to.
Were you ashamed?
No, I'm not ashamed. What was the need to say something? Well, gee, if, you know, there wasn't an if. There just wasn't any need to even mention it.
I might have moved my seat if you told me.
Whatever.
We all had heard her talk that way, and the family knew it, but I never suspected about it. The last day she came to my home, we always drove together. She just wasn't there. She was up in some ethereal plane someplace. She wasn't herself. She wasn't joking. She wasn't assuming, so she always wasn't. Unbelievable. And it wasn't until later that I found out why. That she had committed herself to disposing of herself had she been found guilty. It was not unbelievable to me. I sensed later, in retrospect, that she would have done it.
Well, you must have been on a different plane, too. It must be difficult for you to come in after all this time, and this is it. It all comes down to one decision by 12 individuals, yes or no.
Difficult, Bob. Unless you've been there, it's difficult to fathom feelings and to understand how 12 people who don't know you from Adam can sit there and decide whether you go to prison for life or go back to family as a free woman.
Or in this case, live or die.
Or live or die.
Right. And although, you know, you sit there, as I did, and you watch this play go on before you, he does all this speaking, and he has the witnesses that he interrogates, but there's, the jury never speaks until that final moment.
And then they said not guilty on both counts. Congratulations on your new book, on the trial, everything. We are out of time here. The only thing I can say is my recommendation probably doesn't mean a hill of beans to most people, but I enjoyed it. I like to read books, and read this. It's exciting. It deals with people in our area, and it's a good book, Fatal Dosage, The True Story of a Nurse on Trial for Murder. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week with Open Channel. Please join us then.